another reason why we like the program, is that because using startups and their technologies helps us to offer innovative solutions to our enterprise clients. That's how we become more valuable to our large clients, and that's also the way, and that's how we intentionally select startups. That's how we score and shortlist startups, looking at this criteria: is this technology potentially valuable to our large enterprise clients? Today we have 4 startups in our portfolio. We are going to have 6 by end of year. These are startups from Europe and from US. And by 2020 we have our ambition to have at least 20 startups in our portfolio. That's where we are with startups, and we were speaking a lot about startups yesterday, and there were 2 startups pitching, two startups which are part of Mirotech portfolio. And finally, I'd like to remind you that the whole Mirotech leadership team is here. We will be very pleased to answer your questions. We will be very pleased to communicate. If you have any questions, welcome during breaks. So now I'm ready to give the floor to the next speaker, and finally, let's have a great event.
Thank you, Vladimir.
Let me ask the question.
We have one important question. Yes.
Yeah, let me ask the question. Or you know the answer, you can moderate.
Yeah.
Any guess?
What does it look like?
Braille.
The line Braille. And what possibly could it say?
One idea, yes.
Close, but no cigar. Anybody else? What's
Michael Smith?
what is the vision of the company? Helping visionaries change the world.
Oh, that's what it's.
That's what it says in Braille. Okay. Which I think is
it's
brilliant.
a core purpose of the statement.
Okay,
Core
so
purpose
there's
statement
kind
of
of
the
a
company.
little subtle part
Yeah.
of what our vision is inherent in the dots in our logo, and now actually represents our overall mission. So. Great idea, Valerie. Yay. Okay. I'd like to welcome Markane Selecki, who is the partner at Denton's in Kiev and New York offices. He specializes in general corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, international transactions, real estate, and environmental law. Before joining, Markane was the principal of an international law firm which he founded in 1988. Welcome.
Thank you.
What do you prefer?
I'll just use this one.
Okay, great.
Excuse me, I can make you move real quick?
I think that one's hooked up too.
Yes,
That's
they're
okay.
gonna have you as well.
Good morning and welcome to Denton's. It's a great honor for me to be here with you today. I listened to Valerie a moment ago, and that's awesome. The Braille, tremendous idea, awesome. The other thing that caught my attention, and that I don't know how to truly differentiate, but I thought he was speaking about Denton's when he was making his opening statement, okay? Because Denton's is hosting this together with Mirotech, because we, like Mirotech, we recognize that to succeed and advance, the next generations of technology must be used intelligently to achieve and attain one's goals and visions. To that end, Denton's, we can change the next slide.
You have the clicker,
I have the clicker.
but I changed.
Oh, okay. Denton's, many of you may know, may not know about Denton's through the process of mergers over the last few years. We now are in 73 countries. We have over 9,000 attorneys in 167 locations around the world. It's not that we're trying to cover the globe in purple, as many say. What we're trying to do is be there for every one of our clients, no matter which jurisdiction you're in, so that we can assist in your business. I'm just gonna throw out by way of example, this morning, yes, I split my time between Ukraine and the US. I'm out of both offices. I'm basically treated more like an external general counsel for all my clients. So this morning I dealt with 28 different jurisdictions already on a defined benefit plan matter globally for a client. So the benefit we bring to the table is we can pretty much handle the legal work anywhere that our clients may need it. 70 plus languages, chambers ranked. Dentons in the US, for more than a century, we continue to grow those offices. We have 26 offices throughout the US and more than 1,100 lawyers handling most every possible sector of the legal industry that you may need. Dentons in Ukraine, 25 years of experience. There was reference to my own prior law firm, so I've been in Ukraine almost as long as Dentons has been with our Salem's office prior. We offer, through our 30 attorneys, most everything that a company such as yours may need, other than perhaps tax, but we're working on developing that as well. So why did I say that we are very much, and like Meritech, and why I could have asked Mr. Valeri to actually make this presentation for us. Because as I said, we believe in future technologies, we believe in implementation, and Denton takes it very seriously. And we implement through what we call Next Law. The legal profession, as many industries, is undergoing a disruption driven by forces of globalization, economies, general shifts. We look to work with our clients to not only grow the business, but to integrate and ultimately to reinvent the legal profession. Through Next Law, together with our Next Law Ventures, which is primarily with regard to legal technologies, our Next Law Labs, which advise on legal innovations, Next Law in-house solutions, and Next Law Referral Network and Global Public Affairs Network, we are trying to bring better, faster, cheaper integration into the legal industry. Our services, through our various Next Law operations, cost reductions lead to better relationships, appropriate fee arrangements, increase efficiency tremendously, add value, and we increase our own internal capabilities through our joint ventures such with Watson, etc. Next Law Labs, we solve business problems by leveraging technology. We try and empower the clients. Next Law Ventures, we invest in early stage venture capital. We invest in various legal technology providers looking forward to the future. We work with them to make everything happen in a visionary, forward-looking approach. Some of our venture companies that we're in with, Profinda, File Facets, Beagle. File Facets is primarily for litigation arbitration, Librio. Just gonna touch on a couple of them here. Next Law, innovation as a service. We collaborate with clients to build products. We had a client who was ordered, was under constant pressure for compliance work. We sat with them, we developed a response. We used Next Law Labs to drill down to the client needs and improve services together. Librio was more of a regulatory platform. We worked with the client to develop a new regulatory platform software that they could almost instantaneously be advised of any regulatory change throughout Europe, and we're working on expanding that into other parts of the world. Client collaboration, we work together with Aperio to streamline matters. It's their product. We helped them with the pilot. Now we use it as well, over 200 of our attorneys. So this is just a brief example of how we are, again, looking toward innovation, how we would love to work with all of you and your companies in developing innovation, bringing it forward to the future. I thank you all for being here and joining us, and whatever I could do to help, please reach out, and hopefully we can work together downstream here. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the facility. Thank you. Okay. So our morning keynote, Richard Bush. I had an opportunity to work with Richard a little bit on some other presentations and work through YPO last year. Richard was definitely the smartest guy in the room, so it's an honor to have him here to present today. Richard is the president of NIAC, which is a leading blockchain-based ad exchange here. And he'll tell you a little bit about the technology and how it came about and how it uses blockchain. Richard is a product and technology engineer. He's also the co-chair of the blockchain working group that's part of the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau. What makes, I think, Richard really unique is his finance and advertising experience, and that's really brought him into this fantastic journey of where he is today, and he's going to tell us a lot about that journey. And again, Richard, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much. All right. It's great to be here. Next year, I think next M-Force, I want to see the braille actually, so you can touch it on the flag, okay? Deal?
Deal, like that.
Excuse me a second, I'll make sure I've got all the notes up. Okay, so I'm going to just kick off real quick here by...
No.
Not that?
That was
one?
right.
That's the right one. Just want to tell you a little bit about NIAX. We are, as Michael said, we are an advertising exchange. We are an upfront advertising exchange, which is a new thing for the media and advertising landscape. But the history of NIAX is quite interesting. When I joined a couple of years ago, we were about a year into a relationship with NASDAQ. NASDAQ, obviously everyone knows NASDAQ. NASDAQ is a technology company, and that's part of the business is relatively new for them, or at least they're still on a journey to tell that story. We came into that relationship through a board member who was on the board of NASDAQ for 13 years by a gentleman by the name of Tom O'Neill. This relationship was interesting because we had proposed a change to their underlying technology, which ultimately ended up in a patent. And that patent is the name of the patent is the continuous trading of highly variant inventory sources. And what this fundamentally meant for us and for NASDAQ was that we were opening up a world of new markets, which enabled the trading of something that was highly descriptive. And advertising was a really good use case for that. But additionally, there are many, many other use cases. I'm going to focus heavily today on the advertising one, but I'm happy to share some of the others. And so NIAX has been focused for the last couple of years on bringing forward that exchange. We did two things as part of that journey. The first thing we did was we made a decision very early on to embrace blockchain. And I'll get into blockchain a bit later on because I think that's really there's something fundamentally changing in the digital transformation right now, which I think we will see coming from cryptocurrencies, but ultimately it's bigger than that. The second thing we did, which is kind of on the side, and for us in the advertising world, is actually relatively simple, but it was quite different for NASDAQ, and that was that we launched the exchange in the cloud. All of NASDAQ's exchanges before that had been launched in a single-tenant environment, obviously needed high throughput, they needed to make sure that everything was very well connected so that the speed was there. So those two things have kind of led us on an interesting journey, and I think it's important to understand that. But the last point I'll make is that the core challenge we were trying to address, particularly in the advertising market, but I think it's relevant for many other markets, is that there was a lack of trust and transparency that exists existed, particularly in the advertising market. If you read anything or know anything about advertising, you'll understand it's gone through this middleman-focused challenge in the last 10 years, and it seemed to be empowering a lot of the innovation that's happened in the web. It's particularly when you look at the likes of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and all of the other large organisations which run their businesses from advertising. So that's a little bit about NIAX. I will just tell you a little bit more about the story in terms of the timeline. At the beginning of 2016, we had a design study, which ultimately ended up leading to the patent. And after that design study, we got to a point where we were essentially co-developing this product alongside NASDAQ. And I'll touch a little bit on the kind of approach to that, and particularly how as we move forward in developing in the new world, how that's relevant. The last part of 2016, we essentially took delivery of the first version of the NASDAQ exchange, which was deployed in the cloud. And at the beginning of 17, we announced the relationship with NASDAQ. And since then, it's been frankly a wild ride. The combination of people realizing that there was this new capability that NASDAQ was bringing forward, and at the same time, and that's how we ended up meeting Michael, NASDAQ and myself and a few others from the organisation have been out and about kind of telling the story about this new markets capability that NASDAQ and others are bringing forward. So fast forward to today, or the beginning of 18, we, as NIAX, we've put the system into production, and we've got early trading on the exchange, and we're ultimately growing that business. Right? So I'll give you a bit more insight into that in a little while. So just I want to back up a little bit and just explain a little bit about my background. So I have been in technology, in advertising, majority of the time in advertising, but I started off actually working for Citibank. We wrote risk of administration system for Citibank, which was distributed across 38 countries. It was, and at that time, just for context, we were still sending floppy drives around the world with the system on it. But that's what it was like back then, right? There was not this network of machines where you transferred the files. The training had to be done in person. That was the world that I was in, right? And fast forward to today, we're completely distributed, right? We can send information at the click of a button, right? And it's a very different world. And the development and the process and the let's just say the kind of the network environment or the ecosystems that are created are so much more fluid. They come about so much quicker. And that's, I think, the core of what blockchain is fundamentally changing. It's the reason why I wanted to mention it. Fast forward a little bit for AOL. People may remember AOL. Probably you've still got an email address from AOL. Probably, even believe it or not, still people paying for dial-up for AOL. Think of that, right? That's still part of their business, right? So that business has fundamentally shifted to an advertising model, right? And I helped them build the advertising systems at AOL, and they're still in place today, even though they're now Verizon or Oath. That's the team that I was part of is still there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention about my experience at iPhone Web. So iPhone Web started off as an IP company. It was ultimately doing IP law, and it ended up basically building a lot of the real-time exchanges that exist in advertising today. So in that business, I got to see lots of businesses that wanted to build something with us at iPhone Web, but we didn't feel they had a good chance. So I saw probably 30 businesses a month, of which we would normally take one or two, maybe, on board. So that's the kind of, just to give you context about me and where this perspective comes from, I hope it's helpful. So, as we started preparing for this, it was I looked back at the Blue Ocean Strategies book that I'd read, how long ago it was now, and I realised there was actually a pretty strong connection here as far as value innovation is concerned. So I don't want to teach you the subjects here. I guess that you understand about, and I would advise, well, not advise, but I'd recommend reading the book. But as you look through the difference between red ocean companies and blue ocean companies, it's quite clear. It was quite clear to me that a lot of the things that you do inside businesses, in terms of the tools you use, the frameworks you use, and the approaches you take, aren't actually that different, right? It's just how you use them. that I think is really important. And I won't go into detail about the individual frameworks that exist inside Blue Ocean, but I will touch on a couple just for context. But I think the thing that was really critical when I came to NIAX, and with NASDAQ, that was important to take away from and how it relates to this book, is that there wasn't really a market for what we're doing right now, right? There was still very much people on the phone. There was still very much people using, in some cases, faxes, and a lot of paper being pushed around. Yes, by email, but still not a marketplace for what we were doing. And it was surprising to me, having been in the industry for 15 years, close to 20 now, that was still the case. That the technology hadn't quite serviced, and that there hadn't really been any other innovation or around that part of the market, right? Because we're a forward market, the NIAX, and that forward market is still literally people going for lunch. It's still people on the phone. It's still, and the innovation and people providing value with that innovation hadn't actually happened yet. I think you know the core thing that we realized at NIAX was that there'd been a lot of work in real time. There'd been a lot of work with machines, talking to machines, but there hadn't been a lot of people process automation, as we call it, right? There'd been, and therefore, and actually what's ended up happening in advertising, for context, is that we've created this network of machines that communicate with each other in order to trade when you or I transit a website. But we hadn't really helped the people. We hadn't really helped the people process, get more efficient. There still was a lot of inefficiencies in the people process, and that was, you know, so it was, there was a lot, and the real-time exchanges have created a lot of essentially technology costs, right? The machines that do this are trading, you know, sub 100 milliseconds. They need to store information and process it in a way which is, it's a great place to trade and get data and ultimately create an ecosystem of connectivity between each other, but it wasn't necessarily providing value, right? And it certainly wasn't getting cheaper, right? So it was, you know, it was a little bit technology for technology's sake, right? Which I think is you need, from a technical innovation perspective, you need that in place, but and you need to try and fail, but you also need to recognize when you're not providing the value and reducing the cost over time, you're just increasing the cost over time. And I think that's a critical part of what I learned from this book when I was reading it. So let's talk, let me just share a little bit of these three companies that I've worked at, just to give you a bit of a profile of what the attributes are of them are. So let's start with IPON-Web. IPON-Web is built in a way where there's essentially a foundational toolkit, right, where they can rapidly deploy and rapidly iterate on technology. Now, why is that important? It's important because it meant they could fail very quickly and come back. And it meant they could work with lots and lots of different business models and work out which one works best. Right? The success of IPON-Web was the fact that it didn't have to grow its teams in a way which is you know, too large in comparison to the opportunities, right? So that was a very interesting profile of the business. It meant that it ended up helping more than 100 companies in advertising over the years, and it's about 50 plus clients today. I've been out of the business 2 years, so I'm sure it's grown by this point. The other thing that's important is that it was just a pure technology company, right? Now this introduced an interesting challenge because it was disconnected from the business model, right? So this is the profile of that business. Successful business, been around for a long time. AdTech was the second one. Now this was why I'm in the States. I ended up bringing this business from Europe to US, and during that time we ended up being acquired by AOL. You've heard that part of the story. But AdTech was interesting in the sense that it was a single platform. Right? It was a platform which was built for advertising. It was a platform that would enable buyers and sellers to essentially trade or to buy and sell advertising. It was in competing with Google, with DoubleClick, which was ultimately acquired by Google. And this business was, the way that it was structured, it had a product line on top of that. So you, instead of having just, it was a single platform with multiple product lines. A little bit of a different development approach. It was a little bit slower. It ended up being quarter by quarter kind of development, not iterative, like month, week on week, month on month. So important characteristic about it was that it ultimately had a larger single client base, so it was a lot slower moving. The last company, Niax. Now, what we've done at Niax, I've given you a little bit of background, but we took Nasdaq's marketplace technology, which is what powers more than, I think it's about around a third of all marketplace technology globally. They have, that system has been around for 30 plus years. It's been applied in so many different environments, but the important thing is it's well worn and well tested, and it's trusted. There's something, it's trusted by all of its partners. The last, we added a few capabilities to that, which is where I think the important differentiation here is, right? So because we put it into the cloud, we added the combination of its capability, its long-standing capability in markets, and its trusted nature, and we put it in the cloud, which meant that we could iterate quickly on top of it. So we combined these two models, right, where it was this product-based approach, right, and this very iterative kind of trial and error style approach, and that's been a big game changer for us. Right? That's meant that we can be much more prepared for this next wave of automation, which I'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so onto the topic. So I just want to give you a brief understanding of the core tenets and benefits of blockchains. I think it's the first thing I want to point out is that while Bitcoin and Ethereum and the cryptocurrencies are all the first real instantiations of this technology, there's a much bigger thing going on here, and it's blockchain. Right? Blockchain, so we're not necessarily always talking about cryptocurrencies. We're talking about the underlying technologies or set of technologies which enable, essentially, at the core, they all enable a jointly incentivized ecosystem. And this is something, if you look back to what we've been doing for the last 20 or 30 years with the web, this is something that's been fundamentally missing. Having a jointly incentivized ecosystem, we've had to rely on innovation in large organizations. We've had to rely on somebody to essentially take the risk, right? Because you didn't necessarily have a way to trust an ecosystem, and it jointly incentivized those ecosystem participants to do the thing that you were trying to achieve. Right? I'll give some examples of that. I think that's but that's the first thing that's important to understand. The second thing is really the technology, and it's often talked about as distributed ledger technology, and it's more than just a distributed ledger, right? It really is made up of a few components. It's made up of cryptography, and cryptography means that you can rely on parties knowing who your parties are, knowing that people that are supposed to be part of the ecosystem are actually the people they say they are, which obviously is an important thing when you want to make sure fraud isn't happening and various other things. It's also made up of the distributed network itself, right, which is what the distributed ledger part of the distributed ledger technology is referring to. This is where multiple parties, in the Bitcoin example, it's a lot of machines, it's tens of thousands of machines. In some smaller examples, like in small use cases in advertising, it's hundreds of machines right now. We're getting bigger and bigger. So that's the distributed ledger, the network itself. And then the last thing that was really important, certainly for me, it was kind of my epiphany moment when I first got involved in this whole thing, was this idea that you can finally describe, store, and transfer value. So So if you look back to Napster, I don't know if anyone recognises the logo, but that's the logo for Napster. Right? Napster was around at a time when this distributed network was possible, right? And you could share files, but what you did is you actually shared the file, and you essentially, when you shared that file, you copied the file, right? Copying the file, great innovation in itself, but it didn't help the music industry because guess what? There was rights to that music, and you were buying the rights to that music, and when you just copied the file, you essentially weren't replicating the same kind of economics that existed inside the music industry. And it's only just today, in this time of our lives, where music has started to find its feet in terms of transferring value between the parties, and it's still centralized companies like Spotify and Pandora and Apple who have managed to find that, but it was never quite replicated. So the core thing here that I also want to point out is that it's not just about storing the value, as in the music asset itself, it's also about describing how it interacts with people, right? So, and that's where we can finally, inside the blockchain, the capability enables you to essentially code the rules, right? Say, okay, this party has access to this file, this party doesn't have access to this file. This party is, once you've paid for that file, there's a distribution of funds that goes between the producer of the music, between the distributor of the music, and if you want to get rid of that file and sell it to somebody else, that you no longer have rights to that file, which is really important, right? Actually taking away rights to that file because you've sold it, which is another core tenet of blockchains, and reason why cryptocurrencies have been possible with blockchain is because you can finally check without a centralized party whether someone actually sent something or not, whether it was sent and they lost the right to, once they've sent it to somebody else, they lost the right to own it themselves. And that's because you've distributed the information about who owns what across the whole network, right? The whole network of machines. So, I've done a brief explanation of the benefits, but I will just ask for a quick show of hands. How many in the room have some interaction with blockchain? How many in the room have some interaction with cryptocurrencies? How many, I mean, before today, how many, or even after today, how many of you would feel comfortable explaining about blockchain to the person next to you? Okay, so that number keeps going up, which is good. It means that the industry's doing a good job of explaining. Right, so let's move on to advertising, but I'm going to pepper in here a few examples from outside of the advertising ecosystem. So the first point that I wanted to make is that this digital value transfer, right, which I've talked about briefly before, but let's break it down a little bit in more detail, right? So what do we really mean by something of value, right? So what we're basically saying is that in an example of cryptocurrency, the description of essentially how much of that cryptocurrency you own. It's a relatively simple description, and actually a very simple use case. But when you think about other markets, or you think about other ecosystems, for instance, like a supply chain for someone like Walmart, right? All of the attributes about the thing that is being sent through the supply chain, whether it be a product, whether it be the relationships that that product has to the people that are transferring that product from one warehouse to another, whether it be the state of that product in that supply chain, whether the temperature of that product went up or down on a truck. Essentially, when we talk about when we talk about coding that information, that's what we're talking about, all of that kind of information. That is something today that's held in databases, in some cases still on pieces of paper, off the truck, for the temperature, for instance. So what's the innovation here, or what the kind of promise of this is in the future, is that we can start to put that information in not just in one database inside one company's warehouse, but in a distributed place, right? And for those parties who have the right, or the keys essentially to write and read that information, you right away through the supply chain, you end up with essentially transparency into what's happened in the journey of that product, for instance, for Walmart. And just as a quick note about Walmart, yesterday, they've been running a pilot for more than a year now, and yesterday they made a statement to all the suppliers that by this time next year, they want every single one of their suppliers to be on their blockchain implementation, which is it's a fundamental change. When a company like Walmart makes that mandate, I mean, they're going to have to go with it, or they're not going to be a supplier for Walmart. So, you know, and this is one case of many in many industries. When you look at what's going on inside the advertising industry, it's actually relatively far behind. What we get exposed to in advertising is because Walmart and all the large companies who are advertising, they also have obviously other businesses, which is what they're advertising about, and they're actually further ahead with their blockchain implementations inside their core businesses than they are in advertising. So, you know, I feel, you know, I still feel like we're catching up, and you know, so that's an important point. So, the second part about digital value transfer, I want to reiterate that it's important, is that before we've had to rely on, and I can't express this enough, we had to rely on a centralized party to do this. And I think for a short period of time, or for the first step, we're still going to rely on centralized parties to do this. And you've seen a lot of the challenges that have happened with cryptocurrencies, with government, with people, with just the whole ecosystem being comfortable with that change, right? Just because the technology is capable of doing this doesn't mean that it's suddenly going to happen, right? Because it's about transition, right? So what we're seeing happening is that industries are finding ways to take those steps, right? One example of that is IBM Hyperledger. Now, if you look at IBM Hyperledger, they've created what's called a permissioned blockchain. And a lot of critics would question whether there's value in a permissioned blockchain, because you're still relying on somebody who's trusted to give you access to that blockchain. Now, the way we see it is that this is a stepping stone to build that trust in the ecosystem as people start to learn and people start to get used to the technology. And that the second thing that's important there is that you do need a period of time to translate what you would normally have done in business or normally done with paper, in contracts and just in relationships, into code. And that's really what's happening here. You're essentially encoding those rules into the blockchain. And that's going to take time. It also takes transition from a legal perspective. We're part of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. They spend a lot of time addressing the legal perspective here. And it's not today, contracts and contract law still coming through the first wave of digitization, right? Although there's lots of progress been made. And so inside the Chamber of Digital Commerce, there's actually a white paper that's come out. I'll reference it in the slides. I'm happy to show it afterwards, about the parts of law that could and should ultimately be self-effectuated via some kind of digital contract. And you know, there's some precedent in terms of what you can with e-sign and various other initiatives that have happened 10 years ago that are very relative here too. The second point here is about identity, and identity takes many forms in the advertising industry. Identity is you or I as we log into our services on the web. But identity is also understanding which companies you're working with. And this is particularly prevalent inside advertising because there's been a lot of fraudulent activity that's happened inside advertising where companies are being spoofed. The New York Times isn't the New York Times because some clever engineer has managed to spoof that domain. So identity is at the core of this. From a personal perspective, I think URI's digital identity is a long way off becoming centralized with blockchain. It's going to take loyalty or healthcare or government to make that happen. And I think there's certainly a lot of initiatives we're taking with blockchain to take us down that path. But I think the first step that we're seeing in the industry, like the Walmart example, is that the suppliers have to have a digital identity. And an important part of this digital identity is this cryptography, which basically is the core of it's made up of something called public-private keys. And those public-private keys are basically me as a company or an individual have a private key, and there's a public key which enables everyone else in the network to interact with me and send me something, send me information. Could be money, could be just information. And the combination of those two things are what ultimately make the connection. And so identity is at the core of blockchains. Knowing who the person is on the other side, despite all the rumors about Bitcoins being anonymous, you can. It's not that they're anonymous to the endpoint; they're anonymous to whatever information that endpoint is given you. So that's that. So identity is a critical part of the third one. There is smart contracts. Now, smart contracts really, there's two ways to look at them. One is that they are a set of rules, set of executional rules that exist. They're basically code which tell the blockchain what to do. There's also smart legal contracts, which are the parts of law that can be put onto an automated system. But really, this is what drives the ecosystem. This part of blockchains is what drives the enablement of an automation, essentially the next way I see it, the next wave of automation that's decentralized. Yeah, and I think we've touched on the value chain transparency. I think is inherent in a lot of people's understanding of blockchains. Now, there is some debate, certainly when it's a B2B environment, and of course when it's a B2C environment, that you don't necessarily want full transparency into everything that's happening inside an ecosystem. And that's where I think this public-private blockchain debate comes in. And there's hybrids of those two, which is, like I said, IBM blockchain, Hyperledger blockchain is leading the way there. The thing that we spend a lot of time inside the IAB working group is establishing the same rules that exist inside the advertising ecosystem, where a supplier and a buyer and a seller want to make their information transparent to each other, but they don't necessarily want to make it transparent to the whole network, right? So those same rules can be replicated in a permissioned or a hybrid network. It's already working today, right? So there's no question there. The important point is that the primary parties in that ecosystem who have given their identity, who've established their identity and that are enabled on the network can trade with each other and can be part of the ecosystem in a way where the value chain that the buyer and the seller have established is fully transparent to you. Okay. So I think I want to just give you a little bit of an understanding of how to essentially get involved, right? Because what we'll see, what we are seeing is certainly in the last 2 years, is that there's a lot of talk about the the protocol layer, right? And the protocol layer is Ethereum, it's Bitcoin, it's the essentially the machines and the network of machines that are running the protocol. They're actually the distributed ledger machines. And that is something you, unless you're building a protocol or you're a network layer or an application layer, you're probably not going to engage with it that much. Right? Even if you buy a cryptocurrency, even if you work with Walmart, you're probably not going to touch the protocol layer, right? Because you're essentially going to be the application layer or the networking layer. Right? So the networking layer is the folks that end up connecting with the protocols. So it's things like data sources, or it's companies that are providing information into that protocol layer, and that layer is one that is mostly, for the way it's being used right now, is for current information to get put into the blockchain, right? APIs, so on and so forth. The last is actually what NIAX is, and we made that decision very early on. We've got a very specific business case, which is to store the transactions that exist on our exchange in a blockchain, and ultimately enable that to be distributed amongst our customers, right, as and when they're ready. And the application layer is the layer that ultimately is where I think a lot of the innovation is going to happen. We've seen the innovation happening for the last 10 years in the protocol layer, and it's continuing there. The networking layers in the last 5 years, and the application layer, we still haven't built all of the applications that will exist on this infrastructure. It's a fundamental infrastructure change that's happening. So on the application layer, if you look at the web as a corollary, you've got the protocol is HTTP, right? And that spawned Amazon. It spawned Google. It spawned all of these other businesses that we know and love today, or maybe not love, but we know at least. The application layer is where I think most of the innovation in the next 10 years is going to come. So think about when you're working with companies, or when you're looking at companies, and when you're reading, think about which layer we're really looking at here, because this one's playing out. It's playing out. There's already winners and losers appearing. Networking layer is still fairly early, and the application layer is still TBD. So I wanted to leave some time for questions, but I think there's one part of the Blue Ocean Strategies, which I think was something that we actually did at NIAX. We did a combination of two things. One was a product canvas, and the other was a strategy canvas. And I think this was one of the things that was a core driving part of the book for me, which I still look at today. And that's particularly when you're redefining the problem and ultimately using that use the canvas. You can, even if you don't go through the whole process, actually it's very useful, because what we discovered at NIAX, particularly with this challenge we had with bringing NASDAQ's technology forward, was that we needed to make sure that we were clear about which things we were going to do more and which things we were going to do less of, or nothing at all. And because we were coming into a market which was already, it's kind of played out in a lot of people's minds, but and we were redefining it somewhat from the beginning. And the last part I want to just touch on about learning, and there's a lot more honestly, but the two major things that we've worked with recently, the Chamber of Digital Commerce works across all industries. They're setting the standards at the down in DC, both around smart contracts as well as how token alliances work, which is the vehicle for raising money, the new vehicle for raising money, and they are at the forefront of almost any business. So it doesn't matter which part of the business you're in, whether it's technology or something else. They have other people who are other people who are working, and they're also working heavily internationally, which is helpful because this is not something that the US is necessarily in every area leading the way on. So I wanted to leave time for Q&A in case anything wasn't clear, and that's it.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Richard. A lot of good information there. You mentioned the Walmart example. Do you see, even though we all know blockchain's an ecosystem play, it's a team sport, do you see the next couple of years intra-company, internal value chain work like the Walmart example, where someone can actually control their internal value chain ecosystem? This is an area where blockchain can move faster, while the kinks are being worked out and the protocols and standards are being developed for more intercompany and national and global standards.
Yeah, I think I do think that is true, and I think that's actually where, and I think what's happening right now is that that's not being talked about a huge amount, right? A lot of what's being talked about in the press and publicly is what's happening with the public networks, right? Because people are still holding it a little bit close to their chest. It's become very clear over the last year that it's not going anywhere. The question is, where is it going? As in, which direction is it going? Is it going to just be supply chains? Is it actually going to be currency? Is it going to be something else? So I think what we hear a lot is, and particularly with our connectivity with NASDAQ, we hear a lot of these private pilots that are close to coming out, right? They're close to coming out of the woodwork, and it was great to see the Walmart thing yesterday, because that's a really big one. I mean, it's the same, it's the same thing that happened with, well, in a different industry, but when Apple wanted to make sure that all of its suppliers were running by certain rules in terms of employment rules and so on and so forth. It takes a large company with a big problem, right, particularly that affects a lot of society. When you talk about Walmart's hope in that project is to prevent things like E. coli breakouts, or at least get to the source quickly, so that they don't have a lot of waste in the whole ecosystem. They can just close down that one part of the ecosystem, which you could never do with the current infrastructure. You just couldn't never do it. It literally take you months to find out where that one supplier was, rather than just taking that whole product off the shelf, right? So I think that's where those closed environments, I think, are definitely, it's already clear they're happening. What we hear a lot from our advertising clients is, like I said, they're further ahead in their initiatives internally, and supply chains are almost always the one that comes up in the early stages. Although in advertising, the identity one's coming up soon, coming up also.
So you talked about the idea of identity and transparency, and there's kind of different levels. If the information is being stored, in the blockchain, you want kind of full transparency on the transfer of the asset, but there might be some details that only the parties see. But there also may be details that you want to use internally only in your organization. Is there a way to trifurcate that information in the blockchain? Internal operations, the transactional operations, and the public transfer of that asset, kind of.
Yeah.
And so the blockchain works for individual organizations as well as the transactional part.
So there are, and actually it depends a little bit on what you're trying to achieve with the blockchain, right? So if you think about, so there's a number of ways to do it, right? There's the traditional kind of intranet versus internet style way of doing it, right? Where you essentially link the internet to the internet in a secure way, right? What that means is you go off and do your thing internally, and you write the information in a secure way and connect it to a public blockchain, so that if anyone wants to check that you were doing it by the rules of the network, they can, because there's a record that says you have, but internally you still hold all the information in a way which is very secure and just under your rules, right? So that's the core, that's the fundamental, that's the way that public versus private is panning out today. There's also something called zero knowledge proof, which means that you can provide information in order for someone to process and prove that something was true without providing the actual information itself, right? I'm doing a bad job of describing it, but the zero knowledge proofs are also something that are possible. So that is today, honestly, most of the companies that are dealing with this problem are just making it enclosed environments, right? That's just the easiest way to start. But the technology itself is it's possible from a technical perspective to enable those rules in a way which would make it all on blockchain and ultimately transparent to the rules that you've described at the beginning.
So I've heard quite a bit about performance issues related to blockchain technology. How real is that? And as more technologies move on to the blockchain, will it become an exponentially increasing issue?
It's real because the blockchains that are being used today were designed for, well, let's just say the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a lot of the early variants of blockchains were designed to secure currency or to secure something that needed a lot of machines or a lot of networking power, so a lot of processing power to prove that it had value, essentially, right? So, but that was designed. Those networks, those blockchains were designed for currencies. So, you know, Ethereum's slightly different in the sense that it's designed to enable. It's designed to be more of a programming language. But so the speed issues exist because the use cases that have come about have yet to have a purpose-built blockchain developed for them. So in advertising world, we've got 2 or 3 companies who are purpose-building their own blockchain off of the base of Ethereum to increase the speed for advertising. You know, that use case I think is so. You know, it's you've got to understand that if the speed issue only really exists if you're just trying to replace one system, one database system with blockchain, right? If that's all you're doing, then you're really just going to create yourself a big problem with speed because a centralized database is always going to be quicker. But if you need some of the characteristics of it being distributed in in a relatively real-time way, and it being trusted, and it being and being able to run rules on that data set on the network, then you should start thinking about working with blockchain. So it's it's a bit it's real, but I think it will. We've certainly seen in the last year in advertising that it's become. It was a big talking point. It's become less of a talking point, and now it's just okay. We're finally finding the use cases.
Question one here.
What's the current level of fraud in the global advertising market? I mean, is it due to the conversion or the corruption, as you describe identity and perhaps you have on the screen, or is it does it occur somewhere else in the distribution chain around advertising? Is it a specific focal point which creates fraud in the global ad market, or is it more of a systemic breakdown of the distributed group of contracts between parties?
I think actually my view on this. It's a large portion of the industry. I don't have the stats. I would put it somewhere around a third, something around that amount. Depending on what you count, right? Because there's different types, right? So, but if you take this a lot, it's more than we should have. The reason I believe, and the reason is that we in advertising we used a non-secure way of taking information and transferring it across the web, right? So a lot of the promise of this technology is this idea that you're ultimately securing the transactions, right? Securing them in a way where like I said, each party. We've got also got a very large gap in the sense that you or I as consumers haven't had the best relationship with passing our information for certain uses. Right? We don't. There's no real consent for the use of that information. Right? It's just been kind of used because it was available. Right? So I think there's a number of forces. I think the main force, which I think is a long road to solve, is really you or I as consumers, you or I as people who transit the web actually being comfortable with information being used and us receiving some value for that, which is a fundamental part of decentralized ecosystems, which I think blockchains can very much help with, but it's a long road. But I think in the interim, the first steps that we can do are actually just making sure suppliers, the buyers, and all the people that are in the business, we know who they are, right? Not just some random bot machine that's somewhere else in the world. So I think that hopefully that kind of frames it up a little bit for you. But.
Any more questions for anybody? Working my way through. And the answer to your question, by the way, 40 to 50% is fraud in advertising. But most of it is due to non-performance, where the ad is not seen, and you're billed for it or not clicked.
You're talking about online advertising?
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting subject. One of the things you talked about was the development more rapidly within proprietary environments or individual organizations before there's industry adoption or standardization. And you may or may not choose to address this, but clearly you're a leader in this space. You're implementing such. DoubleClick is a pretty big player in the space, and they've read about blockchain. Where do you see this industry going, since you know it so well?
Advertising?
Yes.
I think where the industry, what I'd like in a utopian world, what I'd like to see is that we finally address this consumer or user, creator, and capital problem that we've had. Right? I think the core of this technology really enables those three parties to trade directly, to interact directly. So examples of that are, today, you see advertisers advertising to you for products, right? That isn't just advertising, right? That could be loyalty, it could be a loyalty scheme, it could be all kinds of interactions between those two parties. Today, a publisher has a relationship with URI where they ask for registration information for use for news or for content. That relationship, I think, can be governed by this, right? And ultimately, the agent, the advertiser, and the publisher have a relationship today, which I think is today broken through the user, but I think it should come directly, where they actually create joint services together and actually offer those and transact directly. I think where I would like to see the industry go in the next 10 years is where we move the centralized companies that are brokering all these things out, let them provide services, and let them support the transition for that ecosystem to exist directly. Because I think it fundamentally solves a big problem that we've had in the web. That's where I'd like to see it go. So if you put Google into that mix, Facebook into that mix, their roles change. And I think we're seeing a bit of that already. I think because whether that will happen in a 10-year time period is another question, but that's what I'd like to see, where I'd like to see it go.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was fabulous. A little introduction to really where value innovation is happening in real world today. So fantastic. Appreciate you getting us there. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back for our next speaker. All right. Bathrooms are out on the side. There's some more snacks in the back, and a little bit of networking.
Two things. One,
Perfect, right? Good, great.
Probably going to be one of the biggest things for blockchain. I don't know how much you know about blockchain. They have what I would call a strong relationship with their suppliers. In fact, people would call it a strong arm relationship. Yes. In fact, in some cases, if their suppliers don't comply, they throw them out, or they suspend them for a year. Typically, I know because I was the beneficiary when I worked for IBM. I was in the storage business. EMC was their storage provider, and they screwed up. And they called us down to Bentonville to provide them with IBM stuff.
Real life blockchain is very different for us. The way he put value innovation just for us. So he did a great job.
That's one thing.
I just want to say thanks for having us. Thank you. I thought you asked great questions as well.
And we'll get you hopefully as our
I didn't realize that there was a template. I just used some of my previous guys.
Yes,
I think maybe we would have turned out the first set of like the first it's hard to see the transportation.
I'm not at liberty to say where we are or not.
well, very excited about where we are. And again, thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Yes, I know, I was actually asking Michael if he did right. So, no, I was here and I could actually see. How much time did you someone just called me?
That's a really good storyline.
Let's do that. Please the donation.
I'll take care of it.
I said, I'm with NIAS. Sure.
And now I'm really focused on blockchain and so project
So at our core, so our platform So we're going to totally, advertising is our first. Sure. Laugh. This is we have and we're sort of indifferent. We are indifferent to what that asset is. You can, as long as you can define it, you can trade. And so whether it's oil, or real estate, or seafood, or whatever, as long as you can define it, right, tradable. On the advertising side, we are focused on that's where there's a marketplace for two parties. We agree upon prices and
Hey, Richard, I'm going to interrupt for a quick question.
And negotiating because it's not worth the time.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question. This is 2 years that we started.
Well, I believe that
I want to follow up. And what basis
There actually is China.
Thank you. Sorry. You're going to lower the lights, right? You're going to lower the center lights?
I'm trying to find the guy, yeah.
The dollars need to move.
That's the next. Maybe the blinds. Maybe I can open the blinds.
If you open the blinds, yeah. Well, absolutely. Marketing guy has, like I get the wall on what marketing guy can help you with. But he doesn't have the time.
It also, that's
Probably get to throw a white hat on. How can I steal the instance from your $1 million contract? But that's why. A lot of people taking a lot of business money off the table, putting very little income. I'm sure you wanted to get a supplier. Right, and now they have all of your data. I'll pick on like the hot athletes with the hottest wives, like guilty. Like that, that is where I am. Oh, thanks. Grab one out of my bag. Yeah, no, grab Richard.
At? 18th Street? Oh, okay, cool. And I'm up there.
Nice. So we're separated by the UN right now. A whole slew of traffic.
I'm involved a lot with different UN groups.
You're actually doing things that matter in the world. That must be nice. That would be nice. I keep exploring that, and then it always boils down to what they will pay me to not work in advertising versus what they will pay me to work in ad tech. And it's like, that's a really big delta. If my kids were out of college instead of like 2 years old, that might be a conversation to have. I got another 15 years of selling my soul, at least.
You know, thank you.
Samir?
Yeah. Commutes in from Connecticut. You get to do that when you're the smartest guy. Like about 70? Wow. That's serious upstairs. Yeah. That is almost like actually kind of good. Fantastic. It's amazing how, on a map, it's like so hard to get over through and have it get. And then it seems like when you're here, then it really is so life away. And then you look on a map and you're like, 6 miles away is an entire other universe that is fantastic to be.
Another possibility from 40,000. You don't expect that.
And you know, it's funny, having one of those things out your window makes you not want to jump off of it.
Yeah.
Because the furthest north, most of the people I know are sort of like gentrified. Not really. Much more.
Yes, and we're catching up, and we're talking about cross-platform, and it's an answer to fish, it doesn't matter.
It does not matter.
Okay, everybody, if we can get back to our seats, please. Back to our seats, please. Trying to get going.
I'll catch up with you.
Don't mind, I can because I don't take
You just kind of, you're out of fortunate.
Oh, now we're budget. That's fortunate to be there.
Oh.
10 years ago. I know.
Okay, so to say, I just wanted to say that you're saying you're going for here.
There we go. It's dark up there now, though. Light that.
I mean, people are kind of wandering around. Can I go stand next to the camera? I need a podium, that'd be great.
That'll work. It's a nice sidelight.
Yeah.
And you got the natural light coming up from this side. Okay, everybody, can it please work over back to our seats?
No, I know.
It's actually very.
Yes, it's exactly what it
Dennis is crew. Time for you to sit down. Tony.
Yes.
What do you think?
The work that we're doing in services at AI.
Same thing.
So,
Yeah. We'll talk about today.
This works in terms of the theme.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I mentioned it to him yesterday, but I'll see.
I'll see. I don't know if he wants to step back here.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I hope we got a very nice look at kind of value innovation in a real-world example, and kind of a very large-scale example. I thought it was also interesting if you look at the way NIAC leveraged some existing technology and a third party to help build out their platform. It's a very similar model to what Miratech does in our marketplace and how we bring value to the marketplace. So I want to introduce our next speaker. Samir Mosky. Samir recently had a Forbes article around his democratization of AI. It was recently published, I think, about a week and a half ago, so it's an honor to have him here to speak a little more about it. He's the founder and CEO of an advanced machine learning company called Fuse Machines that builds state-of-the-art software robots for automating customer service departments by allowing the robots to answer customer questions. Samir is one of the core research scientists at IBM TJ Watson Research Center, responsible for DARPA. I didn't know you were involved with DARPA. Which is, again, it's funded for the speech-to-speech translation project. He's an adjunct professor at Columbia University on the course of Statistical Methods for Natural Language Processing and Programming for Entrepreneurs. Please welcome Samir.
So today I'll be talking about value innovation with AI. And to start off, what I would say is 5 years ago when I started the company, I had no idea what value innovation was. No idea. I've learned a lot over the last 5 years, and I know a lot and how valuable knowing value innovation concept is. But 5 years ago, I came from a very academic background. My life was, tuning hyperparameters, figuring out how to do L2 norm on a new piece of mathematical equation for improving machine learning algorithms and whatnot. That was my life. So I started the company, and then I thought, well, I got to build it. And if we build it, the company will come into fruition and whatnot. I was so wrong, right? Selling is equally hard, strategy is equally hard, besides just writing a piece of code and building a product. Now I know more, and humbled after 5 years of building the company, I will talk about some of the learnings I had, especially in the beginning, when I was just trying to do AI from a very technical perspective, and now shifted to the center where there's putting equal value from the technical perspective and from the business perspective, and how luckily, even though I was not thinking about value innovation, we actually were doing value innovation. And as now, the more I look at what some of the things we were doing on the customer service automation side, I realized we were actually doing value innovation. So today, Fuse Machines is about 200 people company. It's in 4 countries: New York, Dominican Republic, Canada, and Nepal, where we have one of the largest operations. We started out with building our first product, AI for customer service. Then we had a second product line, AI for sales. So we have 2 product lines. And more recently, we have started a new business line called AI as a Service, where our mission is to democratize AI by finding talent around the world, grooming them through our training platform, and building teams that we provide to clients, which we call AI as a Service. And that's what we do. So before I delve into a lot around value innovation side for AI, first I would like to start by talking what AI is. Right? There's so much hype. When I started my PhD almost 15, 16 years ago on doing AI, no, not a lot of people were talking about AI. Even 5 years ago, when we were giving pitches to the large organization, 5.5 years ago, some of the investors told me, because I think we were still at the transition where AI was about to pick up, but hadn't picked up yet as much. Some of the investors said, don't say it's AI. Tell to some of the customers it's a natural language dialogue system, because that's what it is. But now we just say AI for customer service. So first, I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about what AI actually is and have a little bit more deeper understanding of it. Then I'll transition into how we ended up doing value innovation with AI on the customer service side. And then I will end the talk with a framework called AI-DR framework that we have developed as we try to do value innovation with AI for large organizations. So what is AI? So any system, any machine that you build that can take input in many forms and do a reasoning on it and be able to do a task that potentially a human could do is AI system. You're probably seeing a lot of this. And particularly there's all these words that get thrown around these days, right? There's AI, there's machine learning, there's deep learning, there is data science, there is big data. So how are these all related? Are these all AI? So the way I would differentiate, or the way I would define it is, if you're building a machine, right, that takes and automates one of the 5 senses, speech, touch, vision, and so forth, and you build a system that automates that, that's AI. Like self-driving cars that looks at the road, sees the road, figures out how to take a right, how to take a left, and stop when there's a human, that's AI. But how is AI fundamentally driven? Before, in 80s and even early 90s, that it used to be a lot of rule-based system. Until there was a paper in 1994 by some folks at IBM where they took rule-based machine translation system and said, okay, we're going to completely change it to a statistical data-driven system. And then they were able to show that a completely data-driven machine learning system could outwit rule-based system as well. And I think that's when more and more researchers started to say, okay, let's forget about expert systems, rule-based systems. Let's talk about how do we build more complex mathematical algorithms that can figure out patterns better and automate it. All based on all statistical theory that's been developed for more than 40, 50, 60, 100 years. And that's machine learning. And that's the primary driver for all the AI systems. And there are many different kinds of AI, machine learning algorithms. And one of them is neural networks. And neural networks with many, many layers is deep learning. So in the sense, when you hear the deep learning that gets thrown around so much these days, deep learning is just the type of machine learning algorithm, a statistical algorithm that drives AI systems. Now, value innovation. As I told you, 5 years ago, I didn't know what value innovation is. I'll just briefly touch, right? So value innovation, as you heard before in the morning as well, you're trying to create a market where you're creating new value, improving the value, reducing the cost, and not going outside from the place where everybody is competing. And I'm sure that you will see this diagram throughout the day today, where value innovation is, you're trying to improve the buyer value, create new value, or raise the current value, at the same time reduce the cost. The question is, how do we do it? Our more specific question for today's talk is, can we do this with AI? How do we do value innovation with AI? So I briefly talked about AI at a very high level, but I would like to go into a bit more detail on the AI side itself before I talk about value innovation. And as I said before, the key driver for AI is the machine learning algorithms, the statistical algorithms. So if you are sitting in an organization, or if you're trying to help a client to figure out how to do value innovation in AI, the most important concept you've got to understand is machine learning. And the way I would describe it to understand machine learning algorithms is there are 3 fundamental problems. Pretty much if you take most of the machine learning algorithms, you can bin them or put them in one of these bins. How do I take a lot of data and predict scores? Right? And if you really think about it, a lot of problems is to do with that. The scores could mean how good a potential customer is. It could be a lead score, right? So if you build a system to predict a lead score, that's data to scores. The other one is data to classes and data to clusters. So I'll go through briefly each of these. So data to scores is any kind of data, be it structured data, be it unstructured data, where unstructured data could be image data, video data, text complaint data, and so forth, and you come up with a score, and score has a meaning. So now you are thinking of essentially building a machine learning algorithm that sits in the middle, takes this kind of data, and comes up with a score, where scores predict something to automate something, right? So it could be predicting sales, so if you like the previous sales data, and you build a data to score machine learning algorithm, the score is predicting, the sales for next quarter is going to be this much. And that could be used in many different ways. It could be predicting the score for the lead. It could be a text complaint data. So especially in customer service world, right? There's a lot of people complaining online, over the chat and whatnot. Still, a lot of the chats don't really get automatically scored in many different organizations. They are collected, it sits in the database. A lot of people are not really doing anything about it. Can you take all of those transcripts and start scoring them? and figure out for anybody new, you automatically score and say, oh, this is an urgent a complaint to take care of, and so forth. So that's data to scores. So AI, machine learning, deep learning, machine learning is the core driver. Out of machine learning, data to scores is one type of algorithm. Data to classes is the other one. So what do I mean by data to classes? So these were the scores. But if you make the machine not to give the score, but a class itself, then that's data to classes. Why is it useful? So for example, a trader could be sitting on the desk, and you could have a news prediction scoring system that predicts these are all the relevant news for your portfolio in the trade, right? Now you could get a lot of news with a lot of scores on it, where the person has to keep scrolling down to, could be a ranked list of relevant score, and say, oh, okay, this is important, this is not important. But you can have the machine optimized already to just show you what's important, so that you actually don't even have to go through the ranked list. You just see what's important. And that's the slight difference between data to classes, where, you know, data could be emails, and it could be a system that flags compliance violation, right? Instead of you getting a compliance officer getting a list of emails saying this is violation with a score of 0.1 and this is 1.0, you compliance officer only gets alerts when actually there was a violation in compliance. It could be the news that I just talked about. This could be customer service transcripts, where it's categorized as angry, and so forth. So that's data to classes. And the last one is data to clusters. And here, what we are doing is, if you don't have any labeled data, so in order to build both of the data to classes and data to scores, most of the times, I would say most of the times, not all the times, you need a set of training data. How many of you guys know the concept of training data? Okay, so training data is, if you're trying to build, let's say, a classification system, a computer vision system that would take a picture and say, that's a bottle and that's a glass. How would you build one? The way you would build one is because as a human, we have figured out, as we grew up, the characteristics of bottle and characteristics of glass, right? The bottles tend to have a cap at the top. The glasses don't. The bottles tends to have different colors because there's all these wrappers. The glasses don't. Glasses tend to be more transparent. So these are some features that we as a human, when we grew up, have already embedded in our human brain to quickly say this is a bottle, this is a cup, this is a glass. If you want to build a machine like that, you need to take account of same kind of features and give it to a machine, right? So let's say if we try to differentiate between cans versus bottles, that's out there in the front, then one of the most important features that you could use is probably height, right? The cans tend to be short. I mean, there's bigger cans as well. If you buy, you know, large can beer bottles, beer cans, but otherwise most of the soda cans tend to be small. So if you take the height of the can and the height of the bottles and you build a distribution, most likely you'll get a distribution of height where height is shorter, like about 6 centimeters for cans, where the height is about 10 centimeters for bottles. That's the mathematical model. And when you get a new system, when you get a new picture of a can, you just figure out which one is closer to. Now, in order to do that, you need a lot of pictures of cans and a lot of pictures of bottles. And that's what training data is. You take the pictures of cans and say, this is a can, this is a bottle. And as you collect that, that becomes a training data, and you use that for quite a bit for data to classes and data to clusters. Sorry, data to scores and data to classes. But data to clusters is when you don't have any training data. You just have a lot of data, and you want the machine to automatically figure out patterns in it and cluster it together. So for example, this is UI of our customer service automation system on the side that was deployed in New York City government, right? And the system, what it would do is it would automatically look at all the data that customer service departments used to use, and all the data on the web of New York City government, and automatically cluster them, saying this set of documents is about application, this set of documents is about catering, these are the guys, these are the limousine services, and so forth, without you explicitly saying this document is about limousine service. And that's useful because you don't have to train any data. The machine already figured out all the clusters of documents together and was able to use it. And in a sales world or a marketing world, you can think of it this as, what are the clusters of potential buyers that have a similar features, so that you could bin them in one cohort that could be shown an ad for yellow jackets, because this set of customers tends to like color yellow. So that's data to clusters. And like I said, this could be for customer data, and this could be topic cluster for news. So one great example for data to clusters is Google News. How many of you use Google News? Okay. Right? And in Google News, every day there is a cluster, and you can click on the sites and expand the cluster, and it will show you all the relevant news. So every day the machine is looking at all the possible news sources and saying these two are relevant, so let me build a cluster without any training data. Any questions so far? Please, you're more than welcome to please stop me in the middle and ask questions. So we just talked about these three things. Let me see if this works. Yeah, data to scores, data to classes, data to clusters. These are the machine learning algorithms. And there are many different types of them. So if you want to do a data classifying system, you could use Bayes, conditional random fields, max-end models, many different types of machine learning algorithms. That's the system, or that's the machinery that's driving all of AI. And one type is a neural network, which is deep learning. And deep learning has particularly gotten popular because, as I was saying before, on how you try to figure out what features we as a human use to differentiate between classes, and try to extract similar kind of features to feed to the machine. Deep learning got popular because you don't have to decide yourself. You make the machine to decide features. So if you look at image classification systems, deep learning would look at the images, automatically figure out the hierarchical feature representation of it, and then classify it. And what ended up happening, because of this famous paper on image classification, is the machine was able to detect, for example, features that looked like lines that, when composed, became different parts of your face, and then started to look like faces. It was as if the machine was trying to understand what the face looked like. And because of that, the image classification system has gotten to a point where the performance, at least in a given test set, is at what we call a superhuman performance. So all the machine learning algorithms before deep learning, when they were being used, even up to 2011, the error rate was almost at 20%. But since the neural network-based deep learning got embedded, it went all the way down, and about 5% is a human performance, which is, if you ask a human and give the person 100 images, the person would make mistakes on classifying 5 of them, while the machine is actually at 3. So there are some particular problems where machines can do even better than humans in a closed sense. Now, with a deeper understanding of AI, obviously as deep as I could get in 10 minutes, but but hopefully I hope it was useful to sort of think of AI from a perspective of machinery that gets actually used to really build it, rather than just talk about AI. Now let's talk about value innovation, but with AI, right? And one of the things that AI is super useful is AI can bring automation. And a lot of times, AI automation can reduce cost. And not all the times, but many times, automation can increase buyer value as well. Right? And if you are sitting down trying to think of how to do value innovation with AI, you should first think about also what kind of problems are there where it is possible to do some level of automation. And this is a graph from McKinsey where they say, what are some of the tasks that are hard to automate versus what are some of the tasks that are easy to automate. So you should try to figure out from the perspective of how difficult it is going to be. And some of the tasks is going to be super difficult, right? Like trying to create a psychiatrist or a legislator of good machine probably is very hard versus trying to do some automation on predicting which destination you might want to go and optimizing travel tickets is probably easier to do. So first you have to figure out where in this automation difficulty level the problem sits, and then decide if you can do it or not, and decide if it's worth it or not. And what I would like to do is, going back to 5 years ago when I started Fuse Machines, how we ended up doing value innovation with AI, without me actually knowing that we were essentially doing value innovation. But now, as I understand it, it was value innovation. So, five and a half now, years ago when I was sitting down to figure out, okay, I've been in academia way too long. I mean, I still teach, but you know, lot less now. And I was trying to sit down and figure out, okay, what is it that I should try to build a company? You know, and as I said, I was an engineer, so first thing in my mind was building a product. But what kind of product? And my PhD and all my life I've been doing natural language processing, AI for NLP. So I said, well, let's try to see where can I find a problem where the impact could be pretty big if I'm able to automate a few things with natural language processing. And the problem I ran into was customer service interaction. Apparently, just in the US, about 4 billion calls are made. 4 billion calls or requests or tickets are made every year just in the US. So imagine customer service centers, the volume they get on the request from the customers, right? So I said, well, that's a good problem, that's a big market size, and from the data perspective, a lot of data is already logged. So why should we should try to improve this and make the experience better so that, you know, people are not shouting over the phone. Now, the question was, at that time I was not asking this question, but the question was, how do we reduce costs and how do we improve value? Right? So, if we want to reduce the cost from the customer service side, we want to do fewer customer service agents. Because customer service agents are one of the most expensive parts in the customer service departments, in the call centers. And you also want shorter calls. If the customer service rep spends 1 hour, that's not good. Right? You want the customer service reps to be able to answer the queries and resolve the tickets as soon as possible. If you do that, then the customer service rep will be able to take a lot of calls, and the calls will be shorter, which means they can perform better by processing more calls. So that will reduce cost. In order to improve buyer value, in order to not get to this point, and a lot of people get to this point, and I have gotten to this point many times because the call wait time was like 15 minutes. Right? Like I used to have, not to talk bad about RCM, but you know, I used to have RCM, and there were times when I was on call for whole time for 15 minutes. Like, and the problem with that is you have the phone in the hand, you don't really want to give it up because what if the customer service comes right when you just turn it off? Right? You don't want to give that up. So, but you know, you're just waiting. You are trying to do a few things, but your mind is still on the phone, and so forth. So, how do we try to improve the wait time that would improve the buyer value? And those are shorter wait times. Wouldn't it be amazing that any time you call a call center, they just pick you up, and then you don't have line up? Right? That would definitely increase the buyer value. And shorter calls. You call, you say, oh, I have this problem. The person just does whatever the person needs to do, and it's resolved. That would improve the buyer value. So how do we do that? So we said, well, at least from the phone perspective, from the speech recognition perspective, at least 5.5 years ago, speech recognition was not great as it. Right? The speech recognition systems are notoriously perform worse as the noise gets bigger, right? As the noise gets louder. And particularly over the phone, because a lot of phone signals are clipped at 4,000 kilohertz. Because of that, you know, there's a lot of signals that gets lost when the data comes all the way to the data centers for processing. So which meant, at least on the phone side, trying to do automation at the voice level, we thought It's going to be hard. There's a lot of already out, a lot of other parties also trying to do things on the phone to improve the call center of the phone. What we said was, okay, let's not try to compete in that world where it's much harder to make it work. Let's try to work at a completely different channel where we don't have to deal with the phone errors. There's less competition, and there's a lot more competition now, but this is 5.5 years ago, right? We said, okay, we'll do chatbots. And at the time, the messenger didn't even allow bots and whatnot, but now they do. So it was mostly through a website and SMS. A lot of it as a website. So if we try to get AI like that, it would reduce wait time because it's a machine. There's no wait time at all. So there's the buyer value increase. And for a lot of people, it's more convenient. I don't know how many of you use the widgets on Verizon or whatnot, where in the beginning you might get a machine to take basic information, and if it looks like you're frustrated, it will transfer to human. And the beautiful part there is, as you are working, you're just chatting as if you were chatting with one of your friends. You're not on hold for 50 minutes. And then there's a reduced cost, right? Because especially if the machine is able to do a big chunk of the work in the beginning to take the problem, to take what your account number is, whatnot. A lot of the work is already done for agents, especially account numbers and addresses. Over the phone, so for some reason, sometimes it's hard to hear because of the phone signal and whatnot. But here, we're just typing it in, so they have exactly the account number without a lot of errors and whatnot. And preliminary questions already filed. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up doing value innovation on customer service side without actually realizing it was value innovation. And that is probably one of the reasons now, when I look back, we were able to get pretty big customers right in the beginning. Our first client was New York City government. I mean, governments are notoriously hard to close. And we went live within the first year of building the product, in December, end of December, getting a global administration, with a chatbot, our product, live on New York City website. And that's what this will look like, right? You could start typing a question, it would answer questions, it would also give you recommendations of what other things you might be asking. And we learned a lot, right? In the beginning, we said we'll try to do a full automation without any humans involved. And 5.5 years ago, technology was still not there, and we saw a lot of angry customers where, machine wouldn't really get it, the machine would keep asking questions. So the complete machine version, we translated into what we called at that time a human machine system. And it's more common now, where the machine would ask a bunch of questions, try to answer the questions and whatnot. And at some point when people start shouting or people start saying nasty things, it will just transfer to humans, and then it stays at humans. And there were a lot of other optimizations we had to do. So what we did was, when the person gets frustrated, it gets transferred to human. The human would answer it, the chat would again come back to human, and the human would continue. But there were a lot of times when human got hit another point where they were frustrated and got transferred to machine again, to human again. At that point, the second human, the second customer service rep who was trying to serve in the same chat, had no idea what was going on. So it was more time consuming to read all the context and whatnot. So the final system that ended up doing pretty well was a machine system that would try to answer as many questions as possible. When it detected frustration, it would transfer to human and never come back. And it worked well. And we were able to sell it to other banks, besides the government, and whatnot. And there are many other places to think about where you could do value innovation in your customer service side. Many. Now, the next question that I would like to answer is, how do we find opportunities for value innovation with AI in an organization? Right? Like I said, if you look at this example, there's a lot of places where you could automate stuff. Automate response, or rank automatically channel preference, predict product purchase, many things. But the big question is, if you're sitting down for your organization, or you're trying to help an organization, what are some of the questions you need to ask yourself to figure out where can you find that innovation with AI? And the way I would frame the problem is I would frame it in a problem what I call AIDR framework. So basically, this is the framework that we came up with that we thought is quite useful as we build more and more AI products for other organizations and ourselves. How much time do you have? About 10 minutes. Okay. So the AIDR framework, A stands for algorithm viability, I stands for impact on revenue or cost, D stands for data, and R stands not for revenue but for purpose. Right? Revenue is already taken out of here. So let me go through AIDR and how you can think of any problem that you're trying to understand in your business organization and how to take it from the perspective of AIDR. So algorithm viability, what do we mean by that? Right? So there are algorithms that make some things close to reality, but there are a lot of things, a lot of problems where the algorithms or the research in machine learning is not at a point here where it's close to reality. So if you're trying to build a psychiatrist that can talk fluently and just understands everything and have a very long 1-hour conversation with you and different buddies, maybe that's not close to reality here. We have chatbots, simplified chatbots, but not to a point where natural language processing research makes that possible. While, autonomous cars are getting more and more real. So if you're sitting down, trying to figure out, you should think of what are the available algorithms out there that's already been applied to a similar problem, and what is the accuracy of it. And is that accuracy enough for you, from the business perspective, to be able to apply it? The second one is impact. Right? Does it really impact cost or revenue? I think this is pretty clear. The third one is data, and this is super important. Especially for large organizations, data resides on multiple servers, multiple organizations, multiple red tapes. If you're trying to do the value innovation with AI, because building machine learning systems does require a lot of data, we as humans is able to take few samples of data and able to create coherent learning framework and decision-making process. But for machines, it does require a lot of data. So is there enough data? Is one of the big questions. And is there the right kind of data? Is another big question. And if you have unstructured data, how much unstructured data you have and how to process the unstructured data and all those questions related to the data. Yeah.
So you say generate data, so you're saying to the training takes place from the data the system itself is creating versus more data from its original source?
Not from the original source, but what I have seen is the most successful AI systems are those where once you implement it and users start to use it, it generates data that can be fed back to the system.
So just like, in other words, positive and negative type of, it matched, it did its job type data? That it was the classification, it classified right or wrong?
Yeah.
That type of learning?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying
so
to
to give you an example, so we have a sales AI assistant for sales that plugs into your Gmail, reads all your email, and every morning it sends you one email saying, these are the 10 most important people to follow, particularly from sales perspective. Right? Now, if somebody follows up with the people in that list and follows up with 6 people, then the machine is able to take account of that, saying, oh, I predicted these 10, 6 were actually important, and the person followed up, and the 4 were not. And that becomes another set of data to retrain the machine itself the next day, so that it starts to become custom AI system for you. Right? There's no customization in the code, the machine is learning. In order to you keep learning from the user feedback, you need to figure out, is there a possible way where you can design the system and algorithm such that it generates the data. The last one is recurrence, which is, if you automate something that you do once a year, maybe it's not that useful. But if you're able to automate something that somebody does every hour, or every day, or multiple times a day, then there's a lot of value to it. And this is the AIDR framework, which is algorithm viability, impact on revenue, data, and recurrence. And you can apply it to many different domains, right? You can apply it for customer success. You could apply on fraud detection, and this is a particular example on the finance side, identity confirmation and so forth. And as you do it, as I said, besides thinking of the problem in the ADA framework, you should always think of it from the perspective of on the difficulty level of automation and see where you stand. Because the more cognitive system, the more complex cognitive systems that you try to emulate that human does, the harder it is. But the more simpler repetitive tasks you try to make machine automate, that's what you manage to. And that's value innovation with AI. Thank you.
Any questions? Madam?
The power of AI.
What?
Voice activated.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very informative, and I like how you framed it from machine learning into some of the newer applications. My question is on your ADA framework. If you were giving recommendations to a company that was, let's just say they were just gathering initial user information and providing direction on applying certain frameworks, but they had an idea that they might want to move forward and implement AI in the future, but they were just trying to build kind of a basic user interface database at this point. What recommendations, if any, generalized, would you give to such a company?
So if somebody is at a stage where they're trying to build a product, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, they're trying to build a new product potentially, and they know at some point they might use AI, but right now they're not really doing it, but they want to make sure that if they want to use AI, everything is in place, right?
Yes.
So there's no technical barriers.
Right.
It's essential. So if somebody is in that stage, one of the most important part I would say is the data part. Where you don't miss out on any data that could be potentially be useful later on. So what I would tell the potential client or whatnot is sit down, as you design it, think of if you were to automate it with AI, what it would look like. And if you were to build a machine learning system for that, what are all the data points that you would need for that particular automation? And then work backwards so that even though you don't use it right now, still gather those information.
As you said, the world is rife with buzzwords. It's sort of a two-part question. One is, there's talk about RPA and, robotic automation and then AI. Can you talk about the overlap distinction that might apply? First question. And the second was, is this mature enough that there is sort of a standard set of applications that are used for implementation, and just what might some of those be, just out of interest?
So RPA, robotic process automation, there's quite a few companies doing it at this point. Is mostly the applications where the system records what you do and then tries to replicate it. At least in some of the videos of UiPath, automation anywhere, like when I look at some of these companies' videos of examples of the product, I don't see a lot of AI yet. They are more of a software that can track everything you do and redo it for you. But I think it's slowly moving towards adding more AI on it. And they are calling it cognitive process automation, right, with AI on it. So I would see, from the trend perspective, you will see more and more AI added on top of RPAs to make it more AI-driven that can make businesses more complex. And one of the cases is, like, for example, handwriting recognition, where handwriting recognition, the OCR to figure out, documents and whatnot is easier, but handwriting recognition is notoriously hard. And now we're getting to a point, especially because of machine vision improvements on the learning algorithms, we've gotten to a point where you could do it pretty accurately. As far as the number of the second question is, what are some of the applications that are probably at a cusp of, seeing fruition if you apply AI? I would say customer service is definitely one. sales predictions and things like that. I think there's more that will come out of it, especially where people are looking at the audio and then doing prediction on, what kind of audio, what kind of behavior on phones for salespeople translated into radio sales. A lot of computer vision applications, because particularly on machine learning world, machine learning applied on top of computer vision data versus NLP data, language data. Language is notoriously hard. So these on the vision side, image classification has already gone beyond human performance. So image classification systems.
So it seems to me in the AIDR that recurrence and impact on revenue and cost are what my attorney says are business decisions.
Yeah.
This is kind of a chicken and egg question. Does the algorithm viability come before figuring out the data you need, or does the data determine the viability of how you build the algorithm?
Data is equally important, but if you were trying to decide, I would first think about the algorithm viability.
So here's a specific example from my world.
Yeah.
I get asked once a week, does your website let me identify trees? And the answer is no. But they email me and I try to identify the trees for them. So I have the. But I can say that's a maple, but I can't say it's one of the 130 species of the maple. I can tell them it's a can, but I can't tell them what's in the can, like your cluster example.
Yeah, so in that part, if you were to try to apply AIDR framework there, first, when I say about algorithm viability, I'm talking about, is there a machine learning system or the algorithm at a point where it is able to distinguish very nuanced differences in trees? And if somebody has not built exactly on trees, maybe there might be a research paper out there that talks about very nuanced differences between bicycles or cars, right? And if that's possible, then okay, I think the system is, from the research perspective, it's at a point where you can do it. But you don't have the data for all the different kinds of 130 different kinds of maple trees. Now the question becomes, do you have data to train to identify 130 different types of maple trees? And at that point, you need to figure out how to get the data for those 130 different types. So in that case, algorithm viability is viable, but from data perspective, it's a big question mark.
Good morning. How are you? I assume when you engage in a project or initial stages, data cleanliness, data integrity, and figuring out what that is I would assume highly important. Do you have a specific process that initially going into a client that you perform to figure out exactly how that works?
There's no exact process, I would say. But if I were to think of from the big buckets and what we need to do, is first is the data collection, where you're able to bring all the data together, and the second portion is where you're able to intersect the data across multiple things. And then, if it's unstructured data, how do you clean it? Because if it's email, then there are a few things that you need to do to clean it. If it's web data, then there are other things that you need to do to clean it, and so forth.
Michael, I think we have time for like one more question. That's
Anybody
nice,
else?
right?
Yes, good morning. As it relates to your discussion just now around the algorithm viability versus the data element, I want to play devil's advocate real quick and to see what your thoughts are. As it relates to, like, say, trading transactions on, like, say, stock exchange, i.e. NASDAQ, right? If you're trying to, like, say, detect suspicious transactions, wouldn't you need to know, like, what the particular data elements are first before you build the algorithm viability? What are your thoughts on that?
I would still see it as first algorithm viability, and then data. So, detecting suspicious transactions falls under anomaly detection. Anomaly detections are notoriously hard problems because there's not enough data. Right? Like to predict earthquake, for example, I mean, you need Oracle to happen all the time, which you don't. Similarly, among the large volume of transactions stock exchange, probably very few percentage is probably suspicious. And so the question becomes, in that ratio of, let's say, 0.1% or 0.01% of suspicious transactions in this very large amount of data, with that kind of skewed data, what are some of the algorithms that have been used to do anomaly detection? And if there are algorithms that detect such anomalies, then just having even that sliver of data might be enough.
Super, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Great presentation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, we're going to bypass our break and move right to our next session since we're running a little bit late. Everybody can handle that. I'd like to introduce Tony Pasico. Tony is our... No jacket, Tony, come on.
Jacket.
Tony is our VP of Customer Intelligence, and that's actually a perfect name for Tony because Tony knows more things about more ideas and concepts than anybody else I know. Talk to him about music, talk to him about history, talk to him about any type of fact that Tony has an oral built in. Come on up, Tony. Come on. Tony's going to moderate a panel of Genesis experts. It actually leads really nicely into the last presentation, which is, talked a lot about customer service and talked a lot about what you can do with AI in that realm. And this platform is really the global leading platform for customer experience today. So it's going to be a really interesting focus. Tony will introduce the panelists. Come up, please sit down. I got a chair. Be loud.
So, are they getting mic'd up? How
Mics are on, you're ready to go. Keep my mics to that. Yeah, all good.
By itself. So where did Samir go? Did he leave?
No, I'm right here.
I want to use one of your slides. May I use one of your slides? Of course. Can we put the guy calling the contact center?
I led you into it, right? I told you it was right.
I just want that slide. Would you mind? By the way, I want another nice hand for Samir. There we go. I think that's a perfect slide for us to talk about today. So, we have an all-star panel, superstar panel. It's a lot like the American Idol panel. Lots of great luminaries on the panel. People who have, I would say, collectively about 60 years of call center experience, contact center experience. So it's a big crowd in the panel there. So our first question for everybody in the audience: who here has ever called the contact center? Raise your hand. Not everybody's raising their hand, which I find interesting. Who here has cable? Well, that's this question. Who here has tried to call their cable company? Did you look like that? Chances are, especially if you had a rotary phone and they said, press 1 for English. So that would be challenging. So we've all had these kinds of experiences. So today what I thought we would do is have a panel come up here and talk a little bit about what I call the contact center of the future. Okay? So some of the things that we're going to talk about will be artificial intelligence. So we'll talk about a little bit about that. We'll talk about what works and what doesn't work. Predictive routing, self-service, omni-channel. Does everybody know what omni-channel means when we talk about contact centers? No. Okay, not everybody. Does Igor know? Would you like to tell everybody, Igor, what omni-channel means?
You tell us, Tony.
Omni-channel means, well, traditionally, this guy is using a phone, his voice. But as we all know, we have mobile devices. There's things like email. There's things like chat. So there's many different ways to get to the contact center agent today that didn't exist a few years ago. And so the contact center of the future will employ all those channels, and they will have what they call omni-channel. That's omni-channel. Internet of Things. Is everybody familiar with the Internet of Things? Everybody have their home completely wired up? All right, good. And then security and Uberization of agents. So let's call up the superstar panelists. First up, she hails from Normal, Illinois, which means that she's a normal person. Her name is Janelle Deakin. Come on up, Janelle. Nice to see you on the panel. I'm guessing that's your seat on the end there. So Janelle's a Senior Vice President of Product Marketing at Genesis. She's been with Genesis 15 years? 15 years. She has had, I would say, probably 12 different jobs at Genesis, both in pre-sales and consulting, now product marketing. I get this confused with product management, I have to confess. So she is a wealth of knowledge. I can't think of too many people who know more about contact centers than Janelle, except for perhaps my next guest, and he hails from Massachusetts. He's a Bostonian, Mr. Dave Sudby. And he is the Chief Customer Officer at Genesis, and he's been at Genesis 18 years?
23.
23 years.
22, something like that.
So he started when he was 15, and he hired Janelle.
Yes, one of the best things I've ever done.
One of the best things he's ever done, when you have it. So this is a very cozy alignment here. So he's from Massachusetts, and he's a diehard Bostonian fan.
Big time.
And he's rooting for the Red Sox to win the World Series.
Oh.
So, as a house, just so you know, one of the things we share we both have a house on Cape Cod. His is much bigger than mine.
That's actually not true.
And you've been to mine. I've been here too. Why?
You won't, because I was small.
All right, our third panelist also has a large, spent a long time at Genesis. I've worked with this gentleman for almost 30 years or more. We started working together in a company called Informix, and we were going to save the world from a company called Oracle, but we lost. So he comes from St. Louis. Come on up, Eric. Eric is now an executive on many boards. He had a tremendous career as a salesman. It's great to see it. Selling to companies like Walmart, AT&T, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, those kind of guys, Anthem, all the healthcare companies. So he spent a lot of time in sales. So if you want to know anything about how to sell software or technology in general, Eric has the answer for that. And he's from St. Louis. So my first question for Eric today is, what are our chances?
Not good, Tom.
Not good. One other thing I will tell you about Eric is he loves the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals. He loves the St. Louis Blues, and he hates the NFL. So those are people who know about the NFL, you'll know why. And then, finally, my final guest is our newest employee here at Miratech. He spent the last 18 years at a company called Vonage. Come on up, Michael. Michael DiBiase. So Michael represents reality on the panel. So we're a bunch of
You're in trouble.
So we have a bunch of theoreticians up here. Michael has actually built contact centers and spent the last 18 years at Vonage, taking Vonage through an Avaya contact center and then a Genesis contact center. And so you need to know how I build the contact center of the future. That's the guy you ask. Okay, and then a little bit later we'll ask if you guys have any questions for the panel, but let's begin. And we'll start. Where should we start? Well, let's start with Janelle. Hang on, give me a second. I gotta get my notes here. I already asked Eric the softball question.
About baseball.
About baseball, yeah. It's a tough question for Eric. So, all right, we want to pretend that all these folks here in the panel have a crystal ball, and they can see into the future, 2020, maybe 2025, when I cease to care about contact centers. But they can see into the future. So, Janelle. The contact center of the future, is it better than that? Is it better?
I sure hope so. Otherwise, we're doing something wrong.
Okay, so why is it better? How is it better?
I think it's better in a number of ways if you leverage these innovations that we're talking about today and later this afternoon in the right way. And I think it can be better, number one, in driving more efficiencies for both the customer and the employees that are in the contact center through things like automation that can be powered by AI to remove the menial tasks away from everything.
Right.
And then that leaves the more meaningful tasks for the employee, where artificial intelligence can also have a role in assisting them and guiding them with data and context about the person they're interacting with to make it more of a personalized experience. And then thirdly, I think it can be better for the operational staff of the contact center, also leveraging the power of artificial
drive efficiencies in understanding what's going on in the environment, building a workforce forecast and schedule faster, understanding quality by being able to surface trends about what's going on in all of these interactions going on. So I think in all of those ways, things like artificial intelligence can really make it beneficial not only for customers but also the employees of the contact center.
So we can tell this guy to calm down, it's gonna get better, it's gonna get better, everybody's gonna get better.
I think step number one, you never tell somebody to calm down.
All right, so Samir, I learned a couple things from your presentation. One thing I learned is shorter call times. How does the contact center in the future make that happen, Dave?
Well, I think, you might be surprised, but Janelle and I see things a lot the same.
Oh, okay.
So first and foremost, you touched on, if you would answer the question about the contact center of the future, better in one word is better, right? And how do you get better? A lot of the things that you talked about, for sure, but I think some of the things that, if you look at the difference between companies that were born in the digital world, they were digital companies from the get-go, compared to companies that have been around for 50 years, 100 years, they're making the transition between the old legacy world and they're making the transition over to digital.
Right.
And they're spending many years in kind of the gap, where they do some things that are very good and they do some things that they can't do very good for a lot of reasons because of those legacy technologies, right? So, as an example, one way you can make call times shorter, right, is by making sure that the agents, the people who are taking the calls, they're fully empowered and they have technology and tools at the fingertips that they can quickly answer the questions that somebody's, calling about. And I had an example just recently, cable company who will remain nameless, but I had just ordered a new service because I had just moved into a new place that I had renovated. I ordered a new service. And I said, I know the game, I've done this numerous times before, send me the self-install package, and I'll just go do it myself. So I get the self-install package, and sure enough, they shorted me a couple of devices in there. I said, no big deal, probably back ordered, they probably just didn't tell me it was back ordered, no problem. A week goes by, a couple of weeks go by, I said, I never got that. So I actually said, okay, now I have to conjure up the nerve and the energy to call the cable company, and I said, but I'm not gonna do it, I'm gonna use a digital channel, right? So I went to a chat channel. And it was a very simple question I had. I said, here's my account number, here's what I did, you just shorted me 2 devices, can you just ship those 2 devices over? You would think a very simple thing, right? So long story short, 55 minutes later, we had an agreement that they were gonna ship them to me free of charge, right? They wanted to charge me again for it. When you think about it, I did the chat session just to be very quick, right? And I was actually multitasking at the same time, right? So the reality of it is the person who was at the end of the chat session, they were just following the procedure. Sure. Right? They were just doing what they were told. They were looking at a script and they were doing what they were told. And they probably had zero access to the fulfillment screen, right, that I had ordered the package, and they had no idea whether I actually got those 2 devices or not. So we wasted 55 minutes. I'm completely frustrated. Now I'm just arguing on principle, right? When the reality of it is, it could have been a 5-minute interaction if they just had access to the legacy systems, like the fulfillment system. There was some level of integration to the application that they live in every day. So it's a combination of great, they had the digital channel there, but they couldn't help me because all the back office legacy things are completely disaggregated. So you have to put all those things together to be able to allow the agent, who I'm 100% convinced wants to do a good job. They just can't, because systems, management, policies, culture, all that stuff is preventing them from doing it.
So how far are we away from saying, hey Alexa, check out how many cable devices I have and send me what I need?
It's actually funny because you could do that today if you had ability to integrate into these back office systems, right? Now, we all know that these back office systems, a lot of these companies, they're homegrown systems, right? Sure. So it's interesting because I mentioned culture earlier, where you have people that really don't want to improve things, because when they improve things, their career is shorter. Right, and it's just human nature, it's the way it is. The person who has all the tribal knowledge for that back office system, it has a job for as long as he wants to, or he or she wants to, right? So it's not in their best interest necessarily to allow the ability to integrate. So I think the management and the leadership has to present a vision that will get you out of doing that and will get you onto bigger and better things like you know what you're talking about, right? So level the playing field, remove the moats from all those things that are preventing you, and they're causing the 55-minute, interactions, which is causing significant costs, frustration, all kinds of things, and get it down to a very simplistic 5-minute interaction. You can do that, but you have to do those things.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, now, Samir mentioned selling in his presentation. We have a sales expert up here. So tell me about sales in the future, Eric. What's the, how does, do we use AI in the sales organization? Do we use bots to do sales forecasting now? How does the sales organization change? Does it become less personal, you think? What goes on there?
I mean, that's a concern for personalization, because I think all good sales guys love the personalization part of selling. And I think the trust factor is the one thing that I don't think we can capture in AI. So, I just don't see that happening. However, there are a lot of things AI brings to the game for us. You mentioned forecasting as an example. I have some reps who are known for not being good forecasters. So in my head, I have an algorithm. That says if Curtis says 1 million and next week, that really means 500,000 6 months from now.
Yeah.
It's in my head.
We can teach a machine that, can't we?
No, but by the way, there are some tools out there like that that bring the intelligence based on what is the customer looking at, what solutions are they considering, what's the typical time of that, what are the infrastructure implications of that sale, all those types of things. Certainly come into play, and there are tools to do that. And then I'm talking more about a complex sale, which I think is harder to apply AI to. In a simple sale, as was pointed out in the earlier presentation, if I'm online or I'm calling and I want to order some golf balls, there's what color and how many and what brand. And that's about it.
Usually you go with pink, isn't it?
I'm a green guy. But, that is certainly something you can see. Why do you need a human for that? Sure. You really don't.
Right.
And you see that Amazon's doing that now for quite a while. So that's contact center today, not the future. But I wanted to jump in on that question earlier.
Sure, go ahead.
After deferring to, my fellow friends from Genesis, I also want to point out to the audience, because I think there's certainly a lot of people here who are interested in the operations side of managing contact center. And the theme here, of course, is innovation today. I really think there's a lot of great tools on the cusp to make it easier for enterprises to achieve innovation on a more regular, faster, more robust pace than we've seen in the past. Dave mentioned a lot of the issues around dealing with legacy. But in the contact center in the future, one of the biggest benefits, I think, will be if you can innovate your customer experience hourly, by the minute, not by the month, by the year, like we typically see today. There's a lot of cool tools out there that are evolving. They're also, the space itself, CX, we now have an acronym. Whenever we have an acronym, that's usually good. Right? The market tends to start to understand it and invest in it. There's a lot of investment going on in this, all the adjacent spaces around the customer experience and the contact center, just like we've never seen before. And I think that bodes well for everybody in the room who cares about the customer experience and deliver to their customers. And it's going to get better.
It's going to get better. That's the theme.
In one word, better.
We're going to reduce, so far I hear, it's going to get better. We're going to reduce costs, increase innovation, which I hope means increase customer satisfaction, and then we'll be well prepared for the future. So that's all the theory, Michael. Let's talk about the practice. What are the 3 things we got to do when we're building this contact center in the future? Tell us how it happens.
Before we get there, we have to understand where it is that we are today, and we have to make sure that we have a nice, solid, strong core of technology
slapping on all these extras, right? First things first for me would be requirements. Understand what your vision is as a company. Understand what the journey map would be for your customers. Lay those requirements out in terms of the tools that you want your agents to use, chat, voice, any of the other channels that we're going to come up with that may be part of the future. Pretty soon it'll be telekinesis. I'll just think, and the agent will understand and do the same way. But know that going in as you're building. Understand things like routing requirements, things that AI has to learn how to do. Personality mapping, regional routing, getting to an agent based on the part of the world or other experiences, could be things like hobbies or anything they have, something that will allow them to relate to the customer in the most basic form, and maybe you could avoid that unless that's how they relate to the customer. I'm not really sure. And then also you want to be able to measure all these things, so you want to make sure that your requirements include reporting. Sometimes I like to say start with reporting first. Tell me what reports you want to have, how it is that you want to read out on this, and then we'll build to the feature set and the routing behind it. That's first. The second would be to know the capabilities of the technology either that you're using or that you're looking to buy. Understand what it can do, how it can do it, and my advice there is to make sure that there's somebody in the business that makes very good friends with somebody on the technology side, somebody on the technology side that speaks human, that can convey all of the capabilities of the system itself, so that they can meet the requirements, right? You could be talking A, I could be talking A, but I'm talking A in machine language, and you have no idea.
Getting IT to talk to business is a trick. That's a trick for every company. So I'm going to count the 3 or 4 ways you already did this. So I got prepare. I also got don't pinstripe the car before you build it. That's how I would describe it.
I'm glad you mentioned pinstripes. It's one of the Western Red Sox.
I was from New Jersey. I didn't give you the fluff question about the Yankees. I apologize. But don't pinstripe the car before you build it. Okay, and then reporting. That's really good. I like that one. Know what the end is before you begin.
Right. Oftentimes, and I've done this. I go out and you build the system. It's all great, and your customer like, well, I want to read out on XYZ. So you can tell us that we have to build out on XYZ, and it's very important to know from the get-go because it's you get all that stuff in the foundation material in the build initially, and there's a lot less add-on or work you have to do after the fact.
Right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much. So I like that. That's what I would call a practical perspective, folks. You mentioned the term journey map. Does everybody understand what a journey map is? Can you raise your hand and know what a journey map is? All right, that's a small audience. Why don't you give a brief description?
I can give a brief description, but I got to be honest. So being on the technology side, knowing marketing terms and I've been building key components of the journey. I had no idea. But the journey map would be how you want your customers to interact with you. How do you want? What makes your customers feel comfortable? How they want to be treated? How they want to be addressed? How they don't get to that point necessarily in interacting.
And what channels they might want to use? Right? It could be voice, could be SMS. They like to chat. Some customers like to chat. I'm not much of a chatty guy. Video.
That's not true, by the way. That's not true. And I would interject too, that I think, in the real world sense, what happens up there is the journey maps are really built around the use cases that, are the most important use cases for your specific enterprise. If you start there, figure out, let's call it a, sales prospecting call, inbound call comes in, how do you want to operate? Do you want to take does that one be the most important call that's coming in?
Right.
It gets top priority, goes right to the top of the queue, to the most skilled agent based on the data that we gathered off of their web behavior.
Right.
Okay, so, and what happens if they're not available then? The journey map says, well, if they're not available, we give them a callback option or whatever it might be.
Right.
But I think the key to journey mapping is to understand the use cases and the experience that you want your customer to have for each of those use cases.
Well, you bring up something very interesting. So what I hear in some of that explanation is something I've heard the term called predictive routing. So you got an opportunity, you're in your contact center, and they predict where you should go. Anybody see this Discover card commercial where the guy calls the contact center and the person on the phone looks like the guy, whoever called, or the woman?
Yeah.
Right? So there's some predictive routing going there, some personality matching going on. So Janelle, tell us, how is the contact center in the future gonna employ those technologies?
Well, and they already are, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon.
Oh.
But think of
Step on the breeze, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Think of predictive routing as having that crystal ball with your routing engine, essentially taking what you might know in queue-based routing or skills-based routing and applying machine learning on top of that. So you can ultimately know all of this data about your customers, all of this data about the employees, and it's sort of like being that expert hostess at the dinner party, where you just use that information to line people up to get to the best outcome and best event as a result. And that best event could be based on, or should be based on, your business outcomes in driving an improved net promoter score, or reducing costs, or selling more. And you don't have to know what those combinations are, because the machine learning algorithms figure that out for you and get you to that best match the first time, so that, you know, next time Eric calls Comcast, he can get to that Cardinals fan agent, and they can have a great connection and a great relationship.
All right, so you mentioned net promoter score, and we have the captain of net promoter score here sitting to your right. So Dave, how can customers improve, or how can companies improve net promoter scores in the contact center in the future? What do they need to do? What do they use?
Well, I think it's a lot of what they need to do
Or what they
today.
don't do.
What they need to do today. And I think at the end of the day, you need to listen to your customers. You need to know, you need to know what their expectations are. The enterprise doesn't always have, they'd like to think they have the opportunity to set the expectation for the consumer, but they don't always, right? Especially in a B2C world. Somebody just goes and they make a purchase, and they have an expectation of how it's going to work, or how long they should have it, or how stable it will be, or whatever it is. So, you know, they need to listen to what their customers are telling them. So the way you do that is you ask them, and these are all the surveys that we might all see and we might not all answer. So you have to get the information from them, and you ask a customer a question around, you know, how did we do? And if they're gonna take 2 minutes, they'll tell you how you did, both good and bad, right? And the key to all of that is to, if they're taking the time to answer the question, you have to act on it, right? You have to close the loop. And if somebody's really upset with you, you know, within 24 hours, you have to actually reach out to them and say, sorry, you had that sort of interaction. We can fix that now, or we understand we just discovered a systemic issue, and here's what we're doing as a company to solve it, right?
So surveying your customers, so I feel like I'm inundated with surveys.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So is the absence of a bad survey indication of a good survey?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, you can, I spend a lot of time in this, and I spend some time with Bain on a kind of an industry forum on that, right? And a lot of times, you can say, if somebody doesn't answer a survey, that they look more like a detractor than they do a promoter, right?
Okay.
But that's not true in all cases, right? So at the end of the day, what I was just saying, you know, the things that we just talked about, some of those things are done manually today, so moving forward, they can be more and more automated, right?
Okay.
And then you take all that, you lay, you know, predictive routing into it, like Janelle was just describing. If you have somebody calling in, having an interaction with you, and you know the last time they answered a survey, they were a detractor, you might want to treat them differently.
All right, so I want to expand on that, and I'm not going to hit Eric just yet, because we got this guy. Here's one thing about predictive routing. Can they tell this guy is angry?
I can tell.
No, I mean, I understand. You
I
can
wasn't
tell.
sure if that was for him or not.
But if I'm the agent on the other side, this gentleman's calling, we know you know you're an agent, can, in the contact center in the future, will the artificial intelligence engine, will that person know, will that thing know the person's angry, and what will they do about it?
I think they can know in a couple of different ways. One is they can understand the behavior that led up to the phone call to begin with. For
Okay.
example, if I'm on the website and I've already identified myself and something's broken in your bill pay, you can safely assume that they're calling in and they're going to be frustrated by that,
Okay.
right? The other way is through sentiment analysis and real-time speech analysis by the voice and words they use, as well as the tone in which they're using. So yes.
So
they
damn
can
it is a
get-
giveaway?
As
Damn
well
it.
as even if they're waiting on hold for 45 minutes before they even
Right.
get to a person, the agent understanding that, they can probably anticipate it's not going to be a friendly start to the conversation.
Right, and all of that, the way I look at that at a very high level, that's context. You have to
Yes.
know the context of what's going on at the point of interaction. And if you go into it assuming everybody's happy, you might be surprised.
Yeah,
Or if you
no.
go into it assuming everybody's, upset, you might also be surprised, maybe in a pleasant way.
Yeah, I get that, I mean.
So understand the
That's
context.
always been my frustration lots of times when I've had dealings with contact centers, is the context is wrong.
Right.
So that's very, very interesting. So, I asked about if it's gonna end sales, so we've heard a lot of buzzwords here in the industry. What are these things, we all hear about how wonderful they are, and, what's the most overhyped thing that you think you've heard about, or maybe two or three overhyped things?
There's a lot of hype in CX these days, a lot of
Hype in CX,
one of
just the
the-
fact that it's called CX, might that be a hype all by itself?
No, there's an acronym, that's a start.
That's a start?
It's a start, so I mean,
Create hype?
and I'd say, being as a consultant in the last couple of years here, talking to particularly some private equity investors and things like that, to look at the space, it's amazing, every company in the space, has AI somewhere, very high on their list of things they do. They all have omni-channel, they all have predictive routing,
Cloud.
they all have cloud,
Let's not forget cloud.
they all have journey mapping strategies. And it's very confusing. So if you a couple years ago, you could look at, and I advise clients today to look at the DNA. David suggested, or look at the DNA of the vendors that you're working with. Are they digital natives? Are they not? Are they cloud? And did they start from the cloud? Are they a hardware company? Look at all those things, because what AI means at Avaya probably doesn't mean what AI means at Genesis. Or my favorite, 24/7. They actually changed the name of their company to 24/7 AI a couple months ago.
I gotta give them credit for that, that's really.
So,
I think
so
that's
there's
smart.
a lot of those terms flying around, and I think the advice that I have is look underneath the hype. And everybody's got something there, but what they have and how it works or how it might work for your organization, it can be vastly different from what you see on the surface.
Yeah.
So, as to use the car analogy, make sure you lift up the hood when you're analyzing some of the differences out there.
So, yes, as Mr. Reagan used to say, trust but verify. All right, Michael, we talked a lot about the front end of the contact center. How about the guys that are answering the phone? How about the agents? What's gonna happen to the agents? What's gonna be different in their world? And how would you see making sure your agents are most qualified to answer calls?
The agents ultimately are gonna have to adapt. We've seen agents do well in fine scenarios when the data pops, when they get the customer information ahead of time. But with all this data that's becoming available, we see it now with the analytics tools. It's provided after the fact. Ultimately, what's going to happen with AI and the speed, it should be presented to the agent as they're getting the call. So the agent's going to have to adapt to read a brief summary, not just about the account, not just about potentially why they're calling, but their demeanor, how they got there, and it's going to have to happen. I'm going to say real time on their end.
So my favorite question is, how many times am I gonna have to enter my customer number?
You shouldn't have to enter it at all, right? For anything.
They said, I understand you, Mr. DeSico, I got your voice print, here's your customer number, I'm sending that along.
Right, that's really how it should flow. I mean, we've got so many things plugged in, talk about the Internet of Things, right?
Sure.
I'm going off on a slight tangent, but we've got so many things in our own homes that there's 4 people in my house. I have 48 devices that are connected at any given time. Anything from my phone to my fridge, and at some point, all of these things will start communicating with each other. And if I'm picking up the phone to call to call the manufacturer of my refrigerator, who happens to be connected to the internet, they should already know why I'm calling, because my fridge would have already phoned home to tell them that, there's a problem, and the agent will pick up on that. And I shouldn't have to enter so much as, a name, maybe for courtesy, maybe it's not me, maybe it's my daughter calling, but, my customer number, my account number, why I'm calling, all of that should already be fed in.
Wow.
That's my belief.
I can't wait. When do you figure that's happening? Is that
It may already be
November,
happening.
December?
Yeah, well, you know what? It is Samsung, so it's probably already happening, we don't even know.
Oh, yeah, that might be right. You might be right. So that's pretty interesting. I like that. So I won't have to ask that question about my customer number anymore. It's done. So we can go beyond that one. So what are the cutting edge companies, in the context of the future? We talked about the digital natives. Who are the digital? I mentioned Amazon before. How many folks, just out of curiosity, have an Alexa device? Right? That's a minority, but it's I would say a growing minority.
Google Home or both?
Google Home, both.
Yeah, right.
So
Both.
we're gonna I'm gonna let Janelle tell us who the leaders. We kind of all know who they are because we interact with them almost daily. So tell us who you think the leading edge companies are in the space.
So I think the leading edge companies are absolutely going more digital because they have to as they serve millennials and Gen X. So what we see, especially as it relates to adopting artificial intelligence, is actually more financial institutions and telecommunications companies that are employing it not only for chatbots up front to leverage efficiencies and automations, but also the machine learning behind it with predictive routing to get to that granular match. And not even just in contact center customer service, but also in sales and marketing type use cases to really understand the real-time engagement of what's going on in the digital world to engage in that right moment to increase sales conversions even at a high level. So we're seeing actually those two industries really adopting innovations more so than others that we see out there.
So mention finance, and I know Dave and Eric have a lot of experience with finance verticals. So you look at finance verticals, we talked about blockchain earlier today. There's a lot of technology that really focuses on, and there are other companies out there that I'm working with that, I have a credit card in my pocket. Will I need that? Will I have a chip on my finger that's going to identify me as a member of JP Morgan Chase Bank and has my bank account on it? What's that look like for finance companies in the future? How is our new contact center going to change their world?
Want to take it? I'll buy one.
Well, there's so much happening in the fintech. For those of you that were here yesterday, you probably saw, where we were, right? In the heart, in at the Barclays Rise Center, which is where, pardon the expression, a lot of good innovations are rising.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
So there's so much there. But I think that in the context of customer experience, authentication is a huge issue for these guys in terms of how annoying it can be and how dangerous it is if they get it wrong. So it's a double-edged sword, right? If you get it right, okay, big deal if you're the customer. But if you get it wrong, there's fraud. It costs people money. It's very time-consuming fixes, typically inexpensive, it's things like the voice print and the finger touch and all these other things. I think you're going to see a lot of advances there. So when you do have to authenticate,
Post-it note goes away with all my passwords on the side of my computer.
I think so, but it's not. It's a long road to get there still.
I'm pretty old school.
I mean, I just went through a process. This is not fintech, but with the Marriott Starwood merger.
Sure.
We're
growing already.
Yeah, I happened to be traveling in Europe when that happened, and all of a sudden my Marriott app didn't work.
Yeah, it went down.
And then I went online, that didn't work.
And you looked a lot like that when
And then I called, and I had to wait forever. I was gonna ring up all those foreign charges. I just let it go for a couple weeks, and then I did get home. And it took me 2 hours to resolve it, talking to 5 people. So, I had to throw that in there because it's kind of like.
I went through the same thing, and I had to refer to my Post-it note, just so you know, because I used my SPG, what was it, Star Starwood in my
But
area.
at the core of that problem, though, was an authentication issue, which is that they couldn't
Right.
figure out who I was anymore.
Right, they didn't know who you were, right, and they
You know,
didn't, they couldn't correlate
and I
two
think-
accounts.
I think if you talk to big banks and insurance companies, that's a, you know, getting authentication right is a really big deal in terms of customer sat, in terms of how much time they spend. I mean, there's a lot of time spent
So
on authentication, a lot of dollars spent, and they don't always get it right. You know, and being able to, you know, use AI type tools like pin drop to score the incoming calls of the ones that likely are fraud.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that going on. So I think, my opinion, in our world of customer experience, I think the number one issue that they're grappling with to get right is the customer experience authentication
All
element.
right, so we're gonna throw that back to Samir, if he's still around. You gotta fix that, Samir. Fix authentication for all the fintechs.
Right, so Tony, I'd just pile on a little bit. If you think about it, you made the joke about kind of a fingerprint or a chip in your finger or whatever.
Yeah.
We sort of almost already have that, right? You know, whether it's through Apple Pay or PayPal, whatever it is. And then a lot of the financial institutions are beginning to come up with their own, or they're requiring said companies, right? So that is sort of already there, and that'll continue to consolidate. But what Eric talked about, you know, fraud is a huge issue, right? Because if I don't carry a credit card anymore, but I carry all my payment apps on my phone, right? Where I go into Starbucks or I do.
Your credit card free?
Well, actually, I do have 2 credit cards here, right? But in the case if somebody gets my phone, right? What happens? Well, we know that my phone has my fingerprint. You could go through all this. You could say, okay, if somebody takes my phone and they chop my thumb off, and now they're good to go, right? And then, but the challenge that they're dealing with is the fraud, right? So if there is an issue, they do detect an issue, and then they can tell geolocation wise, like if my thumb and my phone go to Nebraska, and they know for the most part I'm generally not in Nebraska, right? So they can tell. So there is ways to do that now, and the companies are beginning to deploy that more and more in like small pilots. But I think, to your point, you mentioned a company called PinDrop, which happens to be a partner of ours, and there are others out there that do that, but that's an area that they're focusing on significantly because a lot of the enablers are already in place, but in order to make it really scale big time, you need to fix those fundamental issues. Right. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. So I'll make sure we got 5 minutes. So should we ask folks from the audience, any questions from folks in the audience? Oh, there's one? I guess there's a few, so yes, sir.
So you mentioned at the top of the panel, when you brought people up, the Internet of Things, and it was briefly mentioned, the Samsung refrigerator example. There's a lot of talk about this wave of new data that's coming into the system, which is going to be great for doing things like fueling, machine learning, et cetera. What's your sense of what the potential is for significant increases in volume? And I ask that question, call volume, service questions. Because you've got all these people out there who now have all of a sudden have all this new stuff in their home they don't understand. But they're trying to figure out, like, what do I do with it? And I've been off and on the call center business for about 20 years, so I keep hearing about the death of the contact center.
Right.
And I hear this other stuff and I'm thinking, maybe not so much. So just interested in the panel's thoughts on that.
You know, my 2 cents on that is, you know, it's like a new campaign or a new product or anything else, right? The contact center doesn't ever die because there's always going to be a new problem that has to be solved real time with some people behind it. And I think as the Internet of Things takes off, you're right. You're going to see some serious spiking going on depending on what industry you serve. But I also think on the longer term, you know, if you look out further out, that you might see that there's some efficiencies that come about that reduce phone calls and interactions, that they're more automated. Back to our AI, you know, hitting the little quadrants there where they all overlap. I think Internet of Things has a great opportunity in the customer experience world to have things like refrigerators actually tell the support organization that help is needed, and you'll see the call go the other way. The company will then call you instead of you going to your refrigerator.
This is a convergence moment.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Right. But you know, there's a chasm that has to be crossed to get there.
Right, and I think
And the contact center is going to play a huge role in how well different companies manage that chasm.
Right.
So to me, it's a real interesting strategy question in terms of how you address your adoption of Internet of Things and how you have your transition plan, because you know it's going to get screwed up, right? You got to have a good transition plan in there. And interesting opportunity for CX professionals to shine here.
Right, and what I would add to that is it allows the company to begin to pivot from reactive to proactive, right? And I think that's huge, and if, I mentioned earlier about my cable story that I just, rehabbed a condo, but I have all new appliances, and everything, thermostats, floor thermostats, cooktop, washing machine, everything is connected to the internet, right? And so, in the past, where you might buy a microwave, you might buy a oven, or you might buy some other appliance, and you only use 10% of the features, right? Or 5%. The fact that now there's a data link, there's some sort of a tether back to the company, they can analyze the data and proactively reach out to you and say, you're not taking full advantage of all the features that you have in this device. Let me give you some tips and push a video down. And all of a sudden now, I'm using 80% of the features, and I'm telling all of my friends what great features come in these devices. And they pivoted from me calling in and asking them, how the hell do I, set the clock, right? To now it's, how do I do, convection roast for a chicken or with these certain spices in it? They're calling you and giving you recommendations that I saw you cook this, right? And now maybe they're pushing you cookbooks. But it's real value-added things, and again, it's the pivot from reactive to proactive, and I think that's gonna make a huge difference, and it's going to allow companies to significantly differentiate themselves.
That's predictive routing, that is beyond predictive routing.
I'd just add one
There was
more.
another question out there? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
One more comment to that too. Proactive even in the sense that the device itself might be the company's customer in a way. So if my washing machine is broken and that says an event to Whirlpool, then the human being may not have to do anything. The customer receives that notification that the washing machine is broke and sends some sort of signal to fix that computer engine without even the person knowing.
Completely,
So that can become really interesting in how you handle those billions of events without the human being even involved. So it's proactive even to the next level.
Mr. Schulman.
I'm interested, as we're moving into decentralized computing, what is a call center? One of the objectives I have is to use a call center for professional services. So let's say we have 20 law firms, and I have a legal question that has been defined through my interaction with the system. Is it possible to have a call center that will direct me to the right law firm? I mean, how distributed can a call center be?
Try that first. So I think that in the future, it won't be a call center. It won't be a cost center. It won't even be a contact center. I think it will be a hub of companies and how they do provide branded experiences. And what that looks like, I think, depends on the needs and values of the customer that you're serving and what your brand values are in how you use that pool of resources to answer questions. It could be a case for that business that it does become a professional services organization, or for others, instead of handling menial interactions in a call center type of world where I'm changing passwords, it becomes really an engagement opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation about your investment portfolio, that you don't have to go into a branch anymore to talk to a financial advisor. So I really think that the context of the future is going to evolve into much more value add for a company and its brand.
So no walls, no cubicles, no, the walls and walls and cubicles and guys on the.
That's happening, that happens today, right? There are clients out there who don't have a brick and mortar experience. It's all digital, right? There's a hub that makes the decision on where the interaction goes. But, we've got people out there that have, thousands of agents that sign on and off hourly that work from their homes in a virtual way. It's very productive. You see that in a lot of different, across a swath of different industries already happening today.
So I'm full of buzzwords. So the Uberization of agents, read this last week, right, where folks, just like driving cars, you want to be an agent for 3 hours a day, you figure out what it is you got to do, you sign on, you log in, and I'm an agent for 3 hours a day. And I'm not an agent, and I could be agents for multiple people.
One question.
Yes, sir.
So
when you talked earlier about proactive contact centers, and the gentleman before talked about, services. So when you think about that, the question is, will companies provide that free of charge? Or does that become, an option when you buy a device, a law service, or whatever? Do you want our optional golden package where, we can predict potential areas where we can help you? If you want that, it's whatever it is. So it becomes a revenue generator.
Completely. Or a differentiator.
Yeah.
Like, you take the Southwest Airlines strategy, still have, to be the one that's still free. I'm sure that drives some business for them, right? Or you can be
Sure.
American and
Yeah,
pay $40 every time you
I'm
come back.
surprised the sales guy said no to the sales one.
I'm thinking the $40.
But to your point, I would say it opens up that possibility, and you can think about in your own context of your enterprise, the market that you compete in, is this good or bad? Is it an area, do I differentiate by doing it for free? Because at the end of the day, I'm doing it on the reverse, I'm doing it on the inbound, and it's actually costing me more. So if I can offload some of the menial tasks, free up some resource to do the more proactive, and I'm doing all that at the same cost potentially, or less, and I can argue in many cases it might be less, right? Because you're doing it at different times of day, you're not doing it during the peak, you can do it in different ways, and what you're doing is you're making your product or your service that much more sticky, and at the end of the day, that's what everyone's looking to do.
Yeah, so 2 points. So one, it becomes a competitive advantage.
Sure.
Right. The second, services sometimes are more valuable than the original product itself.
Absolutely.
And that's where a lot of companies need to think innovatively to do that.
And it may not actually be free, right? We live in a subscription economy.
Yeah, shipping
where
is
it
free
becomes,
if you
right,
order now.
It becomes
Right.
part of the
Built
subscription
in.
cost.
You
of
buy
the
Prime,
service.
you buy Prime, it's free. And that just went up.
Yes.
So we wrap it up? Well, look, we learned a couple things today. We learned from Samir that if we lowered our call volumes, we could save money. And we verified that in the contact center in the future, that's what's gonna happen. So, right off the top, I heard it's gonna get better. So we should all feel really good going into lunch. My recommendation is this glow should last for at least a day. I want to thank the panel for coming up. These guys are If you have questions about how this technology needs to be employed, these are the people to ask these questions. They'll be here for the rest of the day. And thank you very much for your attention. We'll return you to Michael.
I'm really good at this. Lunch is being served outside. Great job.
Just a small comment, if you don't mind, like, grabbing the food and coming back into the